It all begins in a highly technological research laboratory, where scientists were conducting experiments involving DNA manipulation, and there were two patients positioned on stretchers, an adult man and a little girl, both unconscious, while a special liquid was slowly injected through catheters into their bodies. And at first, the vital signs of both remained stable, until suddenly the man's blood pressure began to plummet rapidly. And soon afterwards, his body began to explode in gushes of blood, causing him to open his eyes and scream in desperate pain, which forced the doctors to immediately stop the experiment and question whether the patients were still alive. The older doctor declared with regret that the attempt had failed once again, while the other, younger researcher remained in shock, unable to believe what he had just witnessed, until the older doctor said that he could no longer take part in that research, saying that he would personally request that the project be shut down. But the younger researcher objected vehemently. He tried to convince the director not to cancel everything, but the director replied firmly that this experiment had already caused the death of many patients, and that from the start it was doomed to failure, so he no longer wanted to collaborate with it in any way. And he also advised the young scientist to give up his obsession. At that moment, a nurse called for Dr. Shin, and he, taking the situation coldly, asked if the nurse also thought that the experiment wouldn't work, and then explained that those people only had 2 or 3 days left to live. That is, they would die anyway. And that was why he believed that using them for the benefit of humanity didn't represent a real ethical problem. And when the nurse asked if that was really the estimated lifespan of the patients, Dr. Shin replied that he could leave and leave the cleaning up to him. Shin replied that he could go away and leave the cleaning to him, which clearly made the nurse uncomfortable, but he still left the room, leaving Dr. Shin alone to reflect on his conviction that the research would be successful, although he admitted internally that the real problem lay in the choice of patients, as the ideal person still had to be found, the perfect body that could withstand the experiment and turn it into a definitive success. The next morning, in a simple restaurant, a young man was talking on the phone until he was interrupted by another man who mocked TV shows and said that there were only lunatics appearing lately, and asked if they had at least made some money out of it all, while pointing to a newspaper headline that read, "Nightly Zombie Attack," and saying that this joke had already crossed the line. Then commented that he was thinking of becoming a YouTuber, because at least he would see less disgusting things than in his current job. And meanwhile, the guy on the cell phone asked if he really didn't have any better business ideas, besides becoming a YouTuber, to which the other replied by asking if he believed in the existence of zombies, receiving an immediate negative response, but still insisting that he himself believed in such things, even though he knew it was all a lie in the end. Because if zombies really existed, no one would just be filming them with a cell phone as if it were entertainment. Shortly afterwards, he got up from the table to say that they had finished eating and needed to go back to the hospital, revealing that he was Kang I-Hwan, an employee of the funeral service, who was currently arriving at the hospital to collect the bodies of the patients who had died that morning, and introduced himself by showing his business card to the receptionist, who promptly confirmed that she had received a call and hurried to get the paperwork, while Kang I-Hwan commented that he didn't understand why she seemed so nervous. After all, it wasn't as if the arrival of a mortician was something unexpected inside a hospital, since death was a natural part of the job, and then he wondered why the other colleague was taking so long to show up. Shortly afterwards, his partner finally appeared, still buttoning his pants, explaining that the seasoning in the food had been too strong for his stomach and that it was still burning, which provoked a reaction of disgust in Kang I-Hwan, who then commented that the hospital was strangely empty, something his colleague had also noticed. And after being told to wait, they were soon led inside the building, where the receptionist informed them that the bodies to be collected belonged to a grown man and a young girl, prompting I-Hwan's partner to comment that it seemed like a very tragic situation, as if they were father and daughter. Kang I-Hwan commented that, according to the information, the two had died in a car accident, and Jinmin confirmed that this was what was recorded. But I-Hwan found it strange, as the man's body was in a terrible state, with severe injuries, while the girl's body seemed almost intact, except for a superficial wound on her arm. And he also commented that there were no signs of surgery, which made him wonder why they were both in an operating room if they supposedly hadn't been operated on. Jinmin replied that this wasn't so strange, as it could be that the girl had died before the operation had even been attempted, and as they weren't coroners, they couldn't say anything for sure, as their job was only to collect the bodies, not to do autopsies. So he suggested that they get started straight away. With that, the two of them picked up the necessary papers and tools, such as tweezers and gloves, and Jinmin commented that he now understood why someone might want to leave that kind of job, but he remembered that they were paid to do it and didn't have much choice. While carrying out the cleaning procedures, I-Hwan was brushing the body's teeth when he felt a pinch on his finger, and Jinmin asked him if he had cut his teeth, to which I-Hwan replied that it looked like he had, but that he was fine, as it was only a light scratch and there was no bleeding, perhaps caused by a broken tooth. Even so, Jinmin advised him to change his gloves after carrying his father's body, and they put the body on the stretcher, noting that it was particularly heavy, and with some effort managed to carry it. Meanwhile, Yi-Hwan continued to stare at the little girl's body until he noticed something that made him deeply uneasy, because the wound on her arm had completely disappeared, something he swore was there before, which led him to comment to Jin Min, insisting that the wound had disappeared inexplicably. But before they could discuss it further, Ai-Hwan felt a strange wave run through his body. He lost his balance and fell unconscious to the ground, leaving Jin Min in a panic. When Jin Min tried to help him, Ai-Hwan could only mumble that his body felt strange, as if everything was falling apart inside. And then he began to collapse completely, feeling intense pain, as if his DNA was being directly affected, and as if his heart was about to explode from the inside out, while a sensation of extreme heat took over his entire body. In this state of confusion and pain, Ai-Hwan wondered if he was going to die right there, so absurdly and suddenly, trying to resist the feeling that his body was breaking down inside, while Jin Min screamed for help, desperately calling for doctors and nurses. However, while all this was going on, the little girl's body, which had previously been immobile, began to tremble involuntarily. Sometime later, Ai-Hwan woke up still on the floor, confused, not understanding exactly what had happened until he remembered that he was in hospital and that he had fainted. But then he heard a disturbing sound coming from the room, and when he turned around, he realized that the little girl was standing up, banging her head against the metal door in a continuous and disturbing way. Yi-Hwan was shocked to see the scene, unable to understand how the girl could be standing after being dead. And when he looked over, he found Jin Min's body, now lifeless, lying on the floor in a pool of blood, which made Yi-Hwan ask himself what was happening there, why his own hands were completely bloody, and why he couldn't remember everything. The girl, with her mouth stained with blood, looked at him for a moment with a blank stare, then slowly turned her head and continued banging against the door, without stopping, as if she were stuck in an automatic behavior. And when he looked at his watch, Ai-Hwan realized that 5 days had passed since his fainting spell, which only increased his despair when he realized that he had been in that hospital all this time without knowing what had happened. Confused and overcome by a feeling of deep fear, Ai-Hwan began to realize that something inside him had changed, because his left eye was different, and he felt a strong taste of blood in his mouth, while the metallic smell invaded his nostrils and made everything even more surreal, until suddenly he heard a strange sound coming from Jin Min's body, which began to emit a noise similar to a faint roar, giving indications that he was still alive. Surprised, Ai-Hwan approached and tried to listen to him better, and when he realized that Jin Min was still breathing, he thought that perhaps with quick treatment he could still be saved. Ai-Hwan realized that he needed to take Jin Min to the emergency room immediately, as his condition was getting worse and worse. But in the meantime, the little girl who had previously been immobile remained silent. Still, while outside the operating room, in the corridors of the hospital, the scene was completely chaotic, with everything destroyed, walls covered in blood, and marks of destruction everywhere, indicating that almost no one had survived. One of the few survivors was the hospital director himself, who was walking among the wreckage, believing that everything was over, that there was no hope, since no one had come to save them, and that the world outside had probably already collapsed too. And while he was thinking about this, he was internally blaming that damned lunatic responsible for the experiments that had caused it all, until he suddenly noticed that the receptionist's body, previously motionless on the floor, was slowly starting to move. Terrified by the idea that she too had been transformed into something similar to the other infected, the director concluded that if she remained there, she would surely die. So he grabbed his golf club, the only object he could use as a weapon, and decided that he needed to escape from the hospital as soon as possible. Meanwhile, back in the operating room, Ai-Hwan had placed Jin Min on the stretcher, but he himself was in a weakened state. He felt extremely breathless, his body hot and weak, his stomach writhing in pain, as if he were being consumed by an insatiable hunger. And even though he was confused, he wondered how he could be so hungry if he remembered having eaten something not long before, until he heard the sound of the roar coming from Jin Min's body again, which made him realize that he had no time to lose and needed to find someone to call for help urgently. When he opened the door to the room, he bumped into the principal, who, startled, asked if Ai-Hwan was really alive, as he hadn't expected to find any survivors there. And Ai-Hwan immediately called for help, saying that his friend was injured and needed care. But at that very moment, the little girl, who had remained motionless until then, advanced violently against the headmaster, who tried to defend himself with his golf club but was unsuccessful, who until then had remained motionless, advanced violently against the director, who tried to defend himself with his golf club but was unsuccessful and was brutally attacked, and soon afterwards, a horde of zombies appeared in the corridor, surrounding him and devouring him mercilessly, including the little girl herself, who had joined in the attack. Ai-Hwan watched the scene in complete panic, trembling with fear, until, looking back, he saw that Jin Min was also standing, but he was no longer the same, now with an empty expression and a staggering posture, walking slowly towards the director's body, and Ai-Hwan, still in shock, was trying to understand if this was really Jin Min acting like that, or if it was all just a terrible nightmare. And while his mind tried to deny what he was seeing, his body couldn't resist the stress and he collapsed right there. When he woke up again, he realized that he was still in the operating room and, looking at his watch, noticed that the date read April 29th, although he was sure it was still the 24th, which made him realize that he had been unconscious unconscious for 5 whole days. And then he picked up his cell phone, seeing several missed calls, including a message from his sister asking if he was all right and if he'd seen the news, saying that she and their mother were safe, but they were very worried about him, as he hadn't shown any signs of life up to that point. But before he could reply, his cell phone went dead. Even without understanding exactly what was going on around him, Yihuan knew that he couldn't just wait in there, because if he really wanted to save his sister and mother, he needed to get out of that hospital as soon as possible. So he got up, left the room, and as he walked through the corridors, noticed that the director's body was on the floor, completely torn apart. But none of the zombies he encountered along the way seemed to react to his presence, which made him even more confused. He kept walking until he came across the little girl again, who was still and silent, but still made no move against him, allowing him to walk quietly down the stairs until he finally reached the hospital exit and breathed in the air outside, feeling a little relief for the first time, even though his body was still weak and his stomach ached a lot. Yihuan thought that even in this absurd situation, hunger was understandable, since he hadn't eaten anything in 5 days, and if he carried on like this, he would pass out before he even met his family again. So he decided that he urgently needed to eat something. Spotting a convenience store that was still open, he rushed there, grabbed anything he could find, devouring it without thinking, including a hamburger and a soft drink, and felt that his body was finally recovering, even though he didn't know exactly what he was eating, just driven by the desperate need to satisfy his hunger. And although he usually hated convenience store food, in this situation, he found it all incredibly tasty. It was at that moment, while savoring the food he had picked up from the convenience store, that Yihuan became emotional, because he remembered with sadness that his friend Jin Min had died, and he recalled an old conversation in which Jin Min had commented that perhaps zombies really did exist. And now, after everything he had witnessed, Yihuan knew it was true, which made the pain of the loss even more intense. But he was soon interrupted by a strange noise like a knock, which brought him back to reality. And so he told himself that he had certainly heard something, got up and walked to a door, opening it cautiously and finding a completely terrified girl, crying and trembling with fear, cowering in a corner of the room. Yihuan asked her if she needed help, trying to keep calm. But at the same time, outside the convenience store, a zombie had heard that same noise and was starting to approach the place. Meanwhile, inside the store, the girl began to devour everything she saw in front of her, eating desperately. And Yihuan commented that he had done exactly the same thing just before, warning her that if she wasn't careful, she could end up getting sick. Still, she took a big swig from a bottle of water and said that she was feeling much better, thanking Yihuan for coming along, and then asked how he had managed to get there. Yihuan explained that feeling very hungry, he had walked straight to the convenience store looking for something to eat, and she was surprised to hear that he had simply walked through the destroyed streets of the city as if it were normal. He confirmed that it was true and asked if there were any chargers available in the store, and the girl replied that yes, there were power banks stored there. So Yihuan said he would go and look for one outside, but she warned him not to open the door, as the zombies might notice him, although Yihuan reassured her that he hadn't seen any when he arrived. However, as soon as he opened the door, a zombie suddenly appeared and advanced straight, not against him, but towards the girl. Quickly, Yihuan reacted instinctively and, with an almost superhuman impulse, threw the zombie with such force that it went through the entire store, crashing violently into the wall on the other side. The girl, in shock, asked if he had really done it, if he had really thrown the zombie so hard, while Yihuan looked at his own hands without understanding what had happened. He wondered what that was, where that absurd strength came from, and looking at the zombie's body completely broken on the ground, he tried to understand how he had managed to do that, since he had never imagined he had enough strength to throw someone so violently. But more important than that was the fact that until that moment, no zombie had attacked him directly, as if they were avoiding his presence, something he couldn't explain. Time passed, and when the day began to dawn, the girl was still in a state of shock at everything that had happened and ended up calling him Sir, which made Yihuan ask her not to call him that, as he wasn't old yet, to which she replied that perhaps that wasn't so important at the moment, but Yihuan just agreed and, returning to focus, asked if that was the power bank she had mentioned. She confirmed that she did, but commented that she thought he was a bit weird. And later, Yihuan tried to call Ichai, but only the answering machine picked up, which distressed him as he thought that perhaps he had called too late. He remembered his sisters and began to wonder if they had also been caught up in all the chaos, but he refused to believe that something bad had happened to them, thinking that perhaps they had just lost their cell phones and clung to the hope that they were still alive and waiting for him. So he decided that he had to keep trying to find them, and asked the girl if she had a cell phone, to which she replied that she did, but that it was dead. So Yihuan gave her the power bank and asked her to call the family immediately. Later, as the town continued to be consumed by an infestation of zombies that were slowly approaching the convenience store, the girl finally managed to get her mother on the phone, told her that she had been hiding inside the store since the beginning, and asked how her parents were. Relieved to discover that everyone was alive, she thanked her with emotion, saying that a gentleman had helped her survive, and Juan, hearing this, thought again about the fact that he was being called a gentleman, and mentally commented with irony that he was only 28, so he didn't understand why they were treating him like an old man. The girl then asked if it wasn't better for her to go home, wanting to understand how she could do that in that situation, and also asked if her parents were still alive, since her mother had said they were surviving. And even though she was hopeful, she asked her mother not to give up, although she was visibly shaken, afraid that in a short time, her parents might no longer be alive. Faced with this, Juan had an idea and asked where her house was, saying that he needed to get out of there to look for supplies. And although it was a bit far, he needed to keep going, as he still wanted to find his sister. And if she also wanted to go out in search of her own family, then he suggested she go with him. However, before they could make any decisions, they both heard a loud noise coming from the store, and Juan peeked through the door, realizing that several zombies had invaded the place, this time in greater numbers, not just one as before. The frightened girl asked if the zombies were really out there, and how he planned to get out of the situation, to which Juan replied that getting out wouldn't be easy, and that was why she needed to pay attention, because from that moment on, no matter what happened, she shouldn't leave the place. As he improvised a weapon, he warned her once again not to open the door in any way and assured her that he would be back soon. The girl asked what he was doing, but Juan had already left and locked the door from the outside. Soon after, she began to hear loud banging and screaming sounds outside, which obviously terrified her. But after a few minutes of silence, Juan returned, saying that he had sorted everything out and that she could now leave. Seeing the destruction all around and the zombies completely thrown out of the store, she was shocked and asked if he was really all right, to which Juan replied that he was, although he confessed that even he wasn't sure about that. But for the time being, everything was under control. Later, in a clothes store, Juan was calmly selecting pants, not for himself, but for the girl, as he remembered that she had said she wouldn't leave with him if she didn't have a change of clothes, especially pants. After choosing something suitable for her, he noticed that his own clothes were also in a terrible state and decided to look for something better for himself too. Sometime later, already dressed in new clothes and a coat, he found a motorcycle outside and thought that it really was his lucky day. He went back to the convenience store and handed the clothes to the girl, standing outside while she changed, respecting her privacy. She came out wearing an outfit that looked comfortable and even a little stylish, and Juan apologized for not understanding anything about women's clothes, saying that he just took what he thought would fit well. And she replied that it was fine, saying that she didn't mind and that everything was fine. They then noticed that, for the time being, there were no zombies in sight, and Juan suggested that they go out to collect more supplies before leaving the place, noticing a baseball bat under the counter, probably left there as a safety item, which he decided to take just in case. The girl asked him if he was really taking it seriously, saying that she felt she was putting Juan in danger and that he didn't need to help her that much, as he must also have a family to protect. Juan once again replied that he wasn't old and that she didn't need to feel guilty, because he believed that at some point he too would need her help. And besides, there was something strange, since the zombies weren't attacking him. They weren't biting him, as if they were ignoring him completely. Later, with the road overrun by zombies at night, Juan sped off on his scooter without worrying too much, because the zombies, apart from being slow, couldn't catch up with him, and he believed that speed was enough to leave them behind. As he drove through the city towards where he believed his sister to be, he thought intensely that she had to be all right, because he was going to save her. Meanwhile, at a gas station further away, another survivor was hiding, clutching the last bottle of water he had, and thinking that this was the end of the line, because without any resources, he considered himself completely doomed. He wondered how he'd had the misfortune to end up hiding in a convenience store that had already been looted, as if even in the final moments of his life, he couldn't be a little lucky. And this only reinforced the idea that his entire existence, even though he was an exclusive reporter, had come down to just one relevant story, until he suddenly heard the sound of a motorcycle approaching and thought that perhaps there were survivors nearby. So he looked out and saw Juan getting off his bike, which made him wonder if they were really going to stop for gas in a situation like that, as it would be a huge risk. But he still thought he should warn them, only before he could do anything. A loud noise caught his attention, and he saw one of the zombies being thrown, realizing then that it was Juan himself who was taking on all the zombies with his bare hands, destroying them with extreme force, decapitating them, tearing off arms and legs as if they were rag dolls. And this made the man inside the store wonder what kind of absurd force that was. While he was watching all this, a zombie ran towards Juan, and the man tried to warn him, but was surprised to see that the zombie simply ignored Juan and advanced straight towards the motorcycle, where a girl was. So Juan quickly reacted and destroyed the zombie as well, saying that apparently there were no more around. But the hidden man, still suspicious, thought that perhaps his own eyes were deceiving him, since that man really didn't seem to be being attacked by any zombies. Juan commented that the motorcycle had unfortunately run out of gas, but that luckily they had found a gas station on the way. And at that moment, the man got excited and shouted Juan's name, saying that he had finally found Ai-Hwan an exclusive report, which made Ai-Hwan ask without really understanding what he meant by that. And later, in a calmer moment, Ai-Hwan gave the man some water, who thanked him saying that he felt alive again and that he thought he was going to die of thirst. Then Ai-Hwan asked him how many days he had been resisting in the store, and the man replied that it had been 3 days since he had arrived there, but that unfortunately, the store had already been looted when he entered, so he had no choice but to hide and wait until the heavens seemed not to have abandoned him and sent what he called his guardian angel. So he decided to introduce himself by saying that his name is Kim Gi-do. He's 32 and a reporter, although that doesn't mean much during a zombie apocalypse. And then the girl who was with them also introduced herself by saying that her name is Park Ji-na. She's 20 and a freshman at Korea University. And finally, the protagonist also introduced himself as Ai-Hwan Yan, saying that he's 28 and that before the apocalypse, he worked as a funeral director, which made Kim Gi-do comment that it was a rare profession and that he didn't look like he did that kind of work, to which Ai-Hwan responded by asking if that was meant as a compliment, while Park Ji-na looked at him carefully and asked if he really was 28, since for some reason she thought he was older, which made Ai-Hwan think that he didn't know what hurt more, whether it was the situation itself or being called sir. Kim Gi-do commented that the two of them, Ai-Hwan and Park Ji-na, had met after the apocalypse began, and Park Ji-na confirmed that they had, and that the little uncle had saved her since she was also trapped in a convenience store like him. And Ai-Hwan admitted that he hadn't even asked her name until then. Then Kim Gi-do concluded that everyone there had been through hard times and that they could swap more stories later, but that now there was something he really wanted to know. So he asked if Ai-Hwan really wasn't attacked by zombies. Meanwhile, a large horde of zombies was beginning to approach the post from outside, and Kim Gi-do asked if Ai-Hwan had fainted inside a morgue and woken up 5 days later. And Ai-Hwan confirmed that he had, although he couldn't remember exactly what happened, only that he felt very ill and fell. And Kim Gi-do commented that in an apocalypse, any story that sounds convincing can be true. So he asked if after that he left the hospital and found Park Ji-na, and Ai-Hwan confirmed it again, saying that's exactly what happened. Kim Gi-do then recalled that Park Ji-na had said that she had been in that store for 5 days before being rescued, and that she had managed to get in touch with her family, which Park Ji-na confirmed by saying that she had, and Kim Gi-do said that her family hadn't heard from her for 5 days, which matches the time she had been imprisoned. So Park Ji-na wanted to know what exactly happened during those 5 days, to which Kim Gi-do replied by saying that basically it was during that period that the whole world completely turned into a zombie apocalypse, leaving everything in complete chaos. In the beginning, it really did seem like hell, because people who were fine suddenly turned into zombies without any warning, and a large part of the population ended up dying in that first moment without even understanding what was happening, which made it all the more cruel, because the worst part was that many victims were murdered at the hands of their own friends and family who were already infected and didn't know what they were doing. And so, when Ai-Hwan spoke about it, he soon realized that Gina was visibly shaken, since it brought back painful memories for her. Kim Gi-do quickly realized his mistake and apologized, as he had spoken insensitively, then tried to make amends by saying that he truly believed that her family was still well, explaining that if she was able to communicate with them by phone, that meant that they were alive somewhere and would surely be reunited. And Gina, although visibly nervous and insecure, replied yes, that she still had a hope. Then Ai-Hwan asked how it was that Kim Gi-do ended up trapped in that convenience store, and Kim Gi-do replied that there was no need for so much formality between them, since now they were all in the same boat, facing the same chaos, and then explained that he was trying to investigate the case on his own and ended up entering an extremely dangerous zone, because apparently a reporter's pay wasn't high enough for him to afford to avoid that kind of risk. So he decided to take a chance himself. But while he was doing his investigation, the car ran out of gas, which forced him to stop there, and the rest was easy to imagine. Ai-Hwan then asked if he knew at least the cause of all this, but Kim Gi-do said that this wasn't important at the moment, because what he really wanted to understand was how Ai-Hwan had managed to demonstrate such strength against the zombies. But before they could continue the conversation, they heard a deafening noise coming from outside and realized that the horde of zombies had finally reached the post and were beginning to bang on the door with force, which took them by surprise because they hadn't noticed the approach. And now the number of zombies was only increasing. Kim Gi-do complained, saying that Ai-Hwan had already finished off several of them, but they still seemed endless. And Ai-Hwan realized that they needed to get out of there immediately, but unfortunately, they couldn't use the motorcycle anymore because it was out of gas. So he asked Kim Gi-do if he still had his car nearby, since he had stopped there because of that. And Kim Gi-do replied that yes, the car was right there, but because of everything that had happened, he hadn't been able to get to it. Faced with this, Ai-Hwan picked up his baseball bat and said that he would clear the way so that the other two could get to the car, while asking them to block the door and keep the zombies away as much as possible. But Kim Gi-do looked shocked and asked if he had gone mad, wanting to know how someone alone could face an entire horde, to which Ai-Hwan merely reminded him that the zombies weren't attacking him at all, and then turned to Gina, calmly telling her that she didn't need to worry, because he had promised her that she would come home, and promises for him weren't empty words. Gina, a little annoyed, replied that he didn't need to speak so formally to her, and Ai-Huan gave a slight smile and said that it was fine, that he would be back soon, ready to take them to a safer place, while Kim Gi-doo watched everything in silence and thought that he was stuck with two complete lunatics. Outside, the zombies were already glued to the door, but that didn't last long because Ai-Huan soon came out demolishing everything with his punches, sarcastically apologizing to the zombies, but saying that he wouldn't let anyone in there, and then went on to eliminate each one of them, picking them up by the head and throwing them against the walls or destroying their skulls without hesitation. As he did so, Ai-Huan thought that not only were the zombies not biting him, but it seemed that they didn't even recognize him as an ordinary human being. And although he didn't know the exact reason for this, he also knew that it didn't matter anymore because what he needed right now was to protect those two people and make his way to the car, even if he had to face the whole city alone. Ai-Huan said firmly that no one could get past him, and while this was going on, the two people inside, Kim Gi-doo and Gina, just watched the way he dealt with the situation. And Kim Gi-doo began to realize that the whole thing was very strange indeed, because the zombies didn't attack him at all. It was as if they didn't recognize him as a living being. And what's more, he seemed to have completely superhuman strength, which was probably linked to the fact that he was ignored by the creatures. Gina herself was completely shocked by what she was seeing, but as Ai-Huan continued to stand there in the middle of the fray, destroying everything with his bare fists, he began to think that he was very hungry. A strange hunger, similar to the same feeling he had after going 5 days without eating, just like that day when he woke up alone. And so he began to wonder if he had taken enough food and if he could stop to eat after cleaning up all those zombies. But before he could think of an answer, he had a kind of sudden vision, seeing in his mind the moment when he first met Gina. And then he felt his body go weak, fell to his knees, feeling as if he was collapsing, and wondered what exactly it had been, if it really was a vision, or if perhaps he was starting to crave human beings, just like the zombies did. Meanwhile, Gina was already approaching the door trying to get out to help him. But Kim Gi-doo stopped her, saying that it was too dangerous and that they could die if they went to him in that state. But Gina couldn't accept the idea of leaving him alone like that. Her concern ended up serving as strength for Ai-Huan, who rebelled even more and got up full of rage, going back to destroying the zombies with more brutality than before. And at that moment, he seemed to be overwhelmed by a mixture of pain and fury, panting but extremely determined. Kim Gi-doo, watching all this, asked if he was really all right, because the impression was that he had become even stronger than before. But Ai-Huan, despite everything, still thought to himself that no, he wasn't like those damn zombies. He was a human, and he would never allow himself to become one of them, no matter how much something strange was going on inside him. Later, when he was finally able to breathe a little, Ai-Huan was drinking some of the water they had saved, clearly exhausted, and apologized for having consumed that precious resource. But Kim Gi-doo replied that they were only alive because of him, so he could drink to his heart's content. And Gina asked if he was really all right, and Ai-Huan said yes, that he had only lost a little strength during the fight. Kim Gi-doo said that this was completely understandable, because even if the zombies didn't attack him, it must still have been extremely tiring to face so many of them at once. But despite this, Ai-Huan realized that his hunger wasn't going away, that there was something strange churning in his stomach. So he refocused on the plan, telling Kim Gi-doo to go to the car, which he had said he had left nearby. And Kim Gi-doo confirmed it, saying that the car was indeed nearby, and that if they could get a gallon of gasoline, they could move on. Ai-Huan then said that it was better to stick together because acting separately at that moment was too dangerous, until suddenly a new survivor appeared out of nowhere, asking for help, and Kim Gi-doo was startled, thinking it was another zombie. But they soon realized that it wasn't, and along with him, other people also began to appear, all asking for help. Gina said that they should help, but Kim Gi-doo asked them to be careful, because it wasn't just because they weren't zombies that they could be considered safe, and reminded them that the world had turned completely upside down in the last 5 days. Even so, Gina insisted that she couldn't ignore people who seemed to need help, and Ai-Huan agreed with her, saying that this was the time to join forces and help as many people as possible. And Kim Gi-doo, although suspicious, replied that if the two of them thought like that, he didn't have much choice but to go ahead with their plan. Gina then opened the door and let the others in, and as expected, they all wanted to take advantage of the situation, drinking the water that was there, including a man who said he was injured, lying on the floor pretending to be unconscious. And Gina asked what exactly had happened to that group. One of the new fatter survivors replied that they didn't know for sure, that he had just suddenly fainted, and Kim Gi-doo asked if any of them had been bitten, to which the same man replied no, that absolutely no one there had been bitten, and another added that they had been together since the day before, and if anyone had been bitten, they would have become zombies by now. Even so, Kim Gi-doo couldn't completely trust them, and asked what the group's plans were from now on, to which they replied that they had no definite plan. plan, that they just wanted to find someone who could help them survive, and that's why they had followed the sound of the fight all the way there. Kim Gi-doo commented that he found the whole thing very suspicious, but Gina cut him off at the same moment by saying that, at times like that, people needed to help each other, because humanity would only have any chance of surviving if there was still compassion between them, and that was why it was wrong to judge so quickly. And the man who was pretending to be ill thanked him profusely for his generosity, feigning gratitude, while Kim Gi-doo, uncomfortable, said that he seemed to be the heartless one in the group. And Ai-hwan took the opportunity to ask about the car, confirming that it was an SUV and that it would fit 5 people comfortably. And Kim Gi-doo asked him back why he wanted to know that, saying that he wasn't sure why, to which Ai-hwan replied that he had already decided to go separately with his motorcycle, because they would surely encounter blocked roads, so it would be safer if he went ahead, escorting the group's car. Kim Gi-doo agreed that it made sense, and Ai-hwan told them that they should head for the car immediately, because that post was already out of supplies and continuing there would be dangerous. However, Kim Gi-doo was not at all comfortable with the idea of putting all those strangers in his vehicle, so Gina said that she herself would stay in the store and personally look after the injured man while the other 2 went to the car. Kim Gi-doo reluctantly said that it was fine, but he didn't like the idea of leaving Gina alone with those men at all. Yet he ended up accompanying Ai-hwan, and that was exactly what the crooks were waiting for. Arriving at the car, Kim Gi-doo began to fill up with the gallon of gasoline, still suspicious, and took the opportunity to ask Ai-hwan if he really didn't find those people suspicious, because in his opinion, it seemed that they all had an invisible label on their foreheads that read "bad guys," and that no one knew what had happened in the last 5 days, so there was absolutely no way to trust anyone. Ai-hwan then asked why he himself had run screaming towards them when they met, and Kim Gi-doo admitted that he had lost a little sense at that moment, because he hadn't seen another human being for a long time. Maybe he was hallucinating, or just reacting desperately, and Ai-hwan said that was understandable, that sometimes the body acted on instinct alone. Soon afterwards, Kim Gi-doo commented on something that had been bothering him from the start, saying that it was strange that Ai-hwan was the only one who wasn't bitten by the zombies, and it was at that moment that Ai-hwan's stomach made a loud noise, revealing that he was still hungry, and Kim Gi-doo said that it made sense, since he had spent too much energy punching dozens of zombies, and that as soon as they got out of there, the first priority would be to find real food. But then, Ai-hwan suddenly stopped and said he felt something, and Kim Gi-doo, not hearing anything, asked what it was, thinking it might be zombies nearby, but Ai-hwan replied that it didn't sound like that, more like a voice, a human scream coming from the post. Meanwhile, inside the convenience store at the gas station, Gina was being forcibly grabbed by the 3 men who had pretended to be injured, and the one who had pretended to be ill pulled out a gun and put it to her head, saying that she had better be quiet because that was better than being devoured by zombies, and even mockingly saying that he could hardly believe that they had fallen for that trick so easily. He called Gina stupid and naive, while another man said that they needed to act quickly before the others returned, and the third suggested that they could use her as a hostage. But before they could do anything, Gina reacted and bit down hard on the armed man's finger, who responded by slapping her several times across the face, furious that he had been bitten by an ordinary person and not a zombie, calling it pathetic, while beginning to insinuate that he would do perverse things to her. Just then, Ai-hwan appeared in the doorway of the store with his eyes glowing like a zombie's, and in a single movement, he punched the armed man so violently that he threw him against the wall on the other side of the store, stopping the attack in the same second. The 2 men who were still alive looked at each other, trying to understand when exactly that guy had appeared, and before they could even react, Ai-hwan, who was no longer in a good mood, looked directly at Gina, seeing the state she was in, bruised, frightened, and with her face scarred by the slaps, which made an even deeper fury grow inside him. Shortly afterwards, Kim Gi-doo arrived with his car after filling up, and as he approached the entrance to the store, he saw what had happened and ran to Gina's aid, saying that he knew that bad feeling wasn't just something in his head. Meanwhile, Ai-hwan looked at him and told him to take Gina to the car immediately, because he would catch up with them soon. He just needed to sort out one last thing before he left. Kim Gi-doo, now at the gas station, began to fill up completely, thinking that luckily the zombies had appeared before he had finished filling up, and became even more worried about Gina, realizing that in the end he had been right all along. He thought that experiences like that would become more and more common in this chaotic new world, but at least she was safe now because there was someone willing to protect them at any cost. Meanwhile, Ai-hwan was preparing to face the 2 remaining men, and they both seemed to believe that they still had the upper hand as they were outnumbered and outgunned, with one holding a crowbar and the other an extendable bat. They laughed and said that they were being underestimated, that Ai-hwan was thinking too much of himself. But what they didn't expect was that he would drop his own baseball bat without saying a word, which confused them, and one of them asked if he was giving up already. The other, fatter one, felt a chill and wondered if that guy wasn't acting too strange. Yihuan also questioned himself, because just a few moments ago he was seized by uncontrollable fury, but now, inexplicably, he was strangely calm, as if his mind was completely empty, and all he felt was hunger, a hunger so intense that it bordered on madness. And then, without hesitation, he advanced and killed the first of them as if it were nothing, swiftly and brutally, while the second, totally shocked, watched the scene in silence. Yihuan, without stopping, turned to him with his mouth smeared with blood, which made the man practically urinate with fear, and ask what the hell that guy was, saying that, until recently, he hadn't looked like a zombie, but now he was behaving exactly like one. The man pulled out his revolver and fired in Yihuan's direction, but the next moment, he too was dead, without even understanding what had happened. Yihuan then calmly picked up his bag, collected the supplies that were lying around, and left the store, heading back to where the car was. Kim Gi-doo, who was still worried, heard the sound of the gunshot and became alarmed, but when he saw Yihuan returning in one piece, he only became even more confused and asked if he was really alright, because his expression looked more tired and pale than before. Yihuan, with a tired expression, said yes and asked how Gina was. Kim Gi-doo replied that she was fine now, just sleeping, and that they could check on her more calmly when she woke up. Yihuan then replied that that was a relief and handed him the revolver he had taken from the man, saying that he might need it more than he did, because now Kim Gi-doo also needed to protect himself and Gina. Yihuan added that from now on, it would be best for them to follow Kim Gi-doo's instructions without question. And when Kim Gi-doo asked again if he was really alright, Yihuan just stayed silent for a moment, then replied that yes, he was fine, and asked why not. He said that the most important thing now was to get out of there as soon as possible, because nobody wanted another horde of zombies to appear out of nowhere. Kim Gi-doo, seeing his expression and the state of the place, took one last look at the crime scene inside the store, looked at the revolver in his hands, and realized that it was better not to ask any more questions. So he just got into the car and started the engine. And so they drove away from that cursed gas station, leaving behind yet another terrible reminder of the apocalypse that was now the new world. They were driving down the avenue with Kimiko leading his motorcycle, while Kim Gi-doo was right behind driving the car Gina was in. And at that moment, she began to regain consciousness, still a little dizzy, but already able to speak with some clarity, so she asked in a weak voice what was going on, and Kim Gi-doo wanted to confirm that she really was better, to which she replied yes, even though she didn't really understand what had happened. And that's when Kim Gi-doo explained that she could now rest easy because Yihuan was dealing with those bastards from before, and firmly stated that he would never leave her alone again, which made Gina so emotional that she started to cry. Then Kim Gi-doo asked her if she was in pain anywhere or if she had hurt herself again, but she replied tearfully that it wasn't that, but that she was shaken by the people who had done that to her, because all she wanted was to help, and even in a destroyed world like that, she thought people should still help each other to survive, and now she felt she couldn't trust anyone anymore, because it didn't make sense to go out of your way to help and still be betrayed like that. And Kim Gi-doo said that she was right, that it was the most sensible choice in that kind of reality where nothing could be predicted with certainty. But even if she didn't trust anyone else, it was important that she at least trusted Yihuan, because whatever happened, he would protect her, even from himself if necessary. Later, inside a multi-story building, Yihuan was in one of the apartments where he had just defeated a zombie, and even though he was panting, he wondered if that was the last creature in the place, because he had already faced many, but he believed that there shouldn't be any more enemies there for the time being. Meanwhile, Kim Gi-doo observed the rooms and thought that everyone there could take one of the free rooms to settle down, until he noticed on one of the tables a family portrait of that resident, and then he looked at the body of the man lying on the floor, apologizing silently and wishing him rest in peace. Immediately afterwards, Kim Gi-doo asked if he had checked everything, and Yihuan confirmed that he had, at least the rooms that were open, because the locked ones seemed safe since the zombies themselves couldn't get out. And Kim Gi-doo said that this was great, because they could finally breathe a little more calmly, so he suggested that everyone settle there for the time being, which surprised Yihuan, because he thought it was strange that Kim Gi-doo was saying that, since he had insisted that they continue traveling while they still had the car. But Kim Gi-doo explained that it was too late now, that he himself was exhausted, and that even though there was little difference between day and night in that chaotic world, it was still better to rest at night, especially since Gina urgently needed rest before moving on. Yihuan was silent for a few moments, and then asked if she was really going to be alright, and Kim Gi-doo answered sincerely that of course not, because in a world where no one could be trusted anymore, it was natural for her to feel hopeless. But that was precisely why Yihuan's presence was essential, because in a reality where trust was a rare luxury, he was the only person she had been able to lean on, and that even without realizing it, he was her anchor at that moment, the only person who had saved her, who had stood by her, and who had protected her up to that point, and that even though they had met that very day, it was enough for her to believe that she could trust him. Kim Gi-doo commented that it was impressive to think that all this had happened in just one day, even though he knew that during an apocalypse, this type of situation became commonplace, and then explained that the main reason for him agreeing to stop and rest there there had been Gina's urgent need for rest, but he also confessed that a second reason was Yihuan himself, since he, being a reporter, might not seem so useful in the midst of the chaos of the end of the world, but he still aroused his curiosity. So he took out his voice recorder and began to take notes in order to better understand who Yihuan was, asking if he knew why the zombies weren't attacking him, because that wasn't normal, and he wanted to know if he had any idea why it happened. Yihuan replied that, in fact, it wasn't just that the zombies didn't bite him. It was as if they didn't even recognize him as a human, which made everything even stranger, and Kim Gi-doo concluded that there was probably some hidden principle behind this condition, and that, as it was still the first day of the apocalypse for them, there wasn't enough information to draw any conclusions. But he asked that if Yihuan discovered anything new about his condition, he should let him know immediately. He then asked if Yihuan was some kind of athlete or practiced any sports, and when he heard no, he was even more surprised, because his strength was absurd, almost superhuman, and even in the face of the zombies, he seemed invincible, as if he were a different creature from the rest. So he asked if Yihuan had any idea why his strength was so abnormal. Yihuan replied that he didn't know either, and Kim Gi-doo, realizing that he was being too insistent, apologized for asking so many questions, saying that perhaps his old habits as a reporter had returned without him realizing it. But he recognized that Yihuan had saved his life, and there was no reason to keep questioning him like that. Yihuan said no problem, and then Kim Gi-doo remembered that earlier he had said he was looking for his sister, so he wanted to know if he knew where she was now. Yihuan replied that he didn't know for sure, but he planned to go home, since he lived in Yanggang, even though it was a far and dangerous place. And when Kim Gi-doo commented that it was a long and difficult journey, he asked why he had stopped to help Gina halfway, and Yihuan replied naturally that he just thought it was the right thing to do. Gina, who was already awake at that moment, listened to everything in silence and was deeply touched by his words, holding back the emotion that rose in her chest, and Kim Gi-doo, noticing her reaction, commented that Yihuan was too nice, and that one day he could end up getting hurt because of it, which also explained why Gina had placed so much trust in him. As they still had little information about the infected, Kim Gi-doo said he would record everything they had discovered so far, and as Yihuan was the only one who had faced the zombies up close so far, he wanted to ask if he had noticed anything special about the infected, any characteristics that could be useful in understanding more about them. Yihuan said he hadn't looked closely enough, but commented that the zombies seemed to still have functional senses, especially sight and hearing, which were in full working order, and Kim Gi-doo agreed, saying that this explained how they were able to attack humans with such precision, but what was still a mystery was how they distinguished people from the zombies themselves. It was at this point that Gina, still lying down, intervened, saying that she had already heard an explanation of this, and that the zombies reacted directly to exposed human skin, remembering that the manager of the store where she had been hiding had said this just before she died, and that was what had helped her hide in the stockroom. Kim Gi-doo then asked why she was awake, and Gina replied that she was already feeling better and wouldn't be able to sleep anyway, and took the opportunity to apologize to Yihuan, saying that she knew he must have been worried about her, but that she was fine now, so he didn't have to worry so much. Kim Gi-doo wanted to know more about the exposed skin thing, and asked what exactly she meant by that, and Gina confirmed that she had heard that the more skin that was visible, the more zombies were attracted, which made Yihuan think that it made sense for her to have asked for new clothes as soon as she woke up, especially pants, since she was wearing shorts at the time. Kim Gi-doo reflected that the more they found out, the less they seemed to understand about zombies, and that the worst thing of all was that they still didn't know exactly how people transformed, so he suggested that it might be a good idea to look for gloves, masks, or clothes that covered as much skin as possible. It was at this point that Gina noticed that the radio next to her had turned on by itself, and as she turned the dial to FM 108.8, she began to hear static, but soon a voice came on saying that this was the 6th day since the virus had spread, and that although nothing had changed so far, at least there was still a ray of hope for those who continued to survive. The MBS radio broadcast started at exactly midnight, with the announcer announcing that it was the early morning show, and in the background, a tired voice telling us that the clock was striking 12:11, and that the broadcast was officially starting, mentioning that 5 days had passed since martial law had been declared, and since then, there had been no official pronouncement from the government. Kim Gi-doo, upon hearing this, asked in surprise if it was real, and if the radio was still working, and Yihuan, looking closely at the radio, commented that it seemed to be a live broadcast, to which Kim Gi-doo reflected by saying that if MBS was still operating, perhaps the station was still standing. But Yihuan pondered that it was also possible that those people were just trapped inside the station, not necessarily safe, and that perhaps that transmission wasn't even aimed at informing the other survivors, but rather a way of keeping those inside sane, so that they wouldn't go mad in the silence of the end of the world. Gina then commented that the MBS station wasn't that far away, and wanted to know what they would do about it, but Kim Gi-doo, not wanting to take the lead, replied replied that he would leave that decision to Ai Huan, since without him, no one would have a chance of getting there. And Ai Huan replied that at that moment, the priority was still to get Gina to her parents, and that after that, they could stop and think again about what to do, which made Gina very relieved and happy with the answer. And Kim Gi-doo, accepting his decision, replied that that was fine. After all, he was in charge, and said that everyone was really exhausted, so they could rest a bit before continuing the journey. Gina, still with a downcast expression, asked if the water was still working there, and Kim Gi-doo confirmed with a slight smile that it was, saying that finally everyone could take a real bath after so long dirty and in constant tension. Later that night, Ai Huan began to dream restlessly, mentally reliving a scene in which he was being chased by zombies in a dark alley. But when he lowered his body, none of them attacked him, and it was at that moment that he found himself waking up, or at least he thought he had woken up, because he found himself once again next to his old friend Jin Min, who was smiling at him and asking what he was doing standing there, saying that it was already lunchtime and that they should eat soon. Ai Huan, still confused, asked if Jin Min was alive, and he replied with a nonchalant tone that it must just be stress from work and that a good meal would solve everything. But it was then that the scene changed abruptly, and Ai Huan realized that they were in front of zombies devouring a corpse. And Jin Min, without changing his expression, said that it was also time to eat, that he didn't need to hold back. After all, Ai Huan had always liked that kind of food, and it was in that moment of horror that Ai Huan found himself eating human flesh, which made him wake up immediately, sweaty and panting, still in the makeshift bed in the apartment, feeling his heart racing and muttering to himself that no, he wasn't a monster and would never become one. The next morning, the scene changed to show Gina's parents, who were still alive despite the critical situation, since this was the 6th day since the outbreak began, and although they were without food, they hadn't been infected either, just surviving day after day with their thoughts fixed on their daughter. Gina's father remembered her phone call, when she said that a good person had rescued her, so he believed she was in a safe place, but her mother, her eyes watering, said that even if she was going to die there, all she wanted was to see her daughter one more time. The father tried to comfort her by saying that at least they had managed to say goodbye to her somehow, which should have been enough, but then a loud noise interrupted them, and the mother asked in fright what exactly that had been. The sound was of a motorcycle approaching quickly down the street, and his father commented that perhaps they were survivors passing near the building, so he ran to the window and looked out, where he saw that there really was a person on a motorcycle approaching. And when he realized who it was, he opened his eyes wide, wondering why that idiot was there in the middle of a dangerous area, and how it was possible that the zombies hadn't attacked him yet. Outside, Ai Huan, with a serious expression, looked at the paper in his hand, trying to locate the address correctly, but he was confused because the building looked right, but there was no clear sign of life in the windows or in the immediate vicinity, which made him hesitate for a moment before deciding whether or not to go in. Ai Huan thought that, with so many zombies accumulating in that area, it was only natural that there was no sign of visible life, because the locals were probably all hiding, and decided that the best thing to do at that moment was to clear the place first. So he pulled out his steel baseball bat and went down hard on the zombies, hitting them one by one with precision and brutality until the entire street was clear of any threat. From above, Gina's parents watched the scene in complete shock, unable to believe what they were seeing, because that man alone was facing and defeating an entire horde of the undead without showing any hesitation. And her father, confused and impressed, asked himself who exactly that guy was, who was fighting as if he were invincible. After clearing the entire street, Ai Huan looked around and concluded that Kim Gi-doo's car would never make it up there because the road was completely clogged with garbage, debris, and corpses, so he decided to go up alone first so as not to make Gina worry about what he would find, walking toward the building where her parents were sheltering. As he approached the entrance, they both tensed up, startled to see someone apparently forcing their way into the building, and Gina's father asked if they should go out and confront him, but her mother cautiously said that they still didn't know who the man was. It was at this point that they heard Ai Huan knocking on the door, and from outside he said in a firm voice that he was looking for Gina's parents' house, as he was there because of her, which left them both in shock, as they hadn't expected to hear their daughter's name in the midst of such an extreme situation. As soon as they opened the door, they were visibly surprised to see someone who knew Gina, and Ai Huan, for his part, was equally impacted by their reaction, realizing at that moment the importance of that reunion. Shortly afterwards, Gina arrived, and their reunion finally took place. The three of them hugged each other, crying with emotion, feeling relieved that they were still alive and together, and it was a brief but very intense moment of true happiness. Kim Gi-doo, who had stayed behind out of respect for the moment, eventually approached and apologized for interrupting, but explained that it was still dangerous for them to stand outside and that it would be better if everyone got to a safe place as soon as possible. To which Gina's father, visibly moved, held Kim Gi-doo's hand tightly and thanked him sincerely and emotionally, saying that he would would never forget what they had done for his daughter. Kim Gi-doo, a little awkwardly, replied that he hadn't done much, and that the real credit went to Ai-hwan. But Ai-hwan just said that it didn't matter at the moment, because the most important thing was that Gina was back and safe. So they all went into the apartment, and Gina's parents commented on how incredibly lucky they felt to still be alive. The father explained that, on the day it all started, he had luckily only worked part-time and come home early, which had allowed them to take shelter before the situation got out of hand, and that he had barricaded the windows and the front door, preventing the monsters from breaking in. Even so, during all those days, he never gave up hope that his daughter was alive, and he said he didn't even know how to express his gratitude that they had brought her back. Kim Gi-doo said again that he hadn't done anything, and that, in fact, he was the one who had been helped by Gina and Ai-hwan at various times. Ai-hwan then asked if Gina's parents had stayed there the whole time during the last 6 days, and the father replied that, yes, that's right. They hadn't left the building once since the apocalypse began. He explained that the electricity had gone out on the second day, but that the water had kept flowing for longer, and that was what had allowed them to survive until now. But unfortunately, the food had run out recently, so they were already preparing to starve. Ai-hwan then asked Kim Gi-doo if they had seen any accessible supermarkets on the way there, and Kim Gi-doo replied that they had, that most of them seemed locked, and that perhaps this meant that they hadn't been looted yet, as they were completely isolated and restricted. Ai-hwan said that the priority now is to find food anyway, because without that they wouldn't be able to keep the 3 of them alive for long. And Gina's father asked if he intended to go out again, even with the danger outside, to which Ai-hwan replied firmly that right now the most dangerous thing would be to remain there without food, since they had been without for 2 days. And now that Gina was home and the family was together, they needed to start thinking about the future. Kim Gi-doo agreed, saying that now that they were all together, they needed to focus on surviving, because that neighborhood was partially populated, and there was still a risk of intruders in addition to the zombies themselves, so they needed to be prepared to deal with any situation. Gina's father said that he wanted to help in any way he could, but Ai-hwan kindly replied that this wasn't necessary, because he must be exhausted after everything. And more importantly, now that his daughter had returned home, it was better for them to take advantage of this moment and spend time together while it was still possible. Gina's father became even more emotional, and with his eyes watering, thanked her again for everything, repeating his words with a shaky voice, because he couldn't express clearly how grateful he was to have his daughter alive by his side again. But Gina, despite the joy of the reunion, couldn't help worrying about Ai-hwan, especially now that he was getting ready to leave again. When they started organizing themselves to pick up supplies, Ai-hwan asked if Kim Gi-doo would go along, and he said of course he would, because they wouldn't be able to carry all the food themselves, and needed to make the most of the opportunity, especially with the car as transport. Kim Gi-doo, holding a large pair of pliers in his hands, explained that he didn't want to depend on Ai-hwan forever, as he knew he couldn't carry the whole group by himself, and firmly said that he wouldn't be a burden. Ai-hwan accepted the help naturally, and said it was fine, that they would be back soon. Gina's parents sincerely wished them a safe return, and said goodbye with hope in their eyes. So the 2 of them set off on the motorcycle, leaving the family in the apartment. Gina's father, still apprehensive, asked if they really believed that they would return, and her mother commented that now that her daughter was home, the 2 of them might think about going another way and not returning. But Gina confidently replied that they wouldn't, because Ai-hwan always keeps his word. Later, the 2 arrived in front of a large market that seemed to be intact, surrounded by padlocked chains, and Kim Gi-doo, with the pliers, managed to cut the padlock with some effort, allowing Ai-hwan to open the doors. As soon as they entered, they were faced with a surprising scene. The entire market was full of supplies, completely preserved, with shelves full of food, utensils, and essential products. Kim Gi-doo was shocked, unable to believe that it was all really intact, and Ai-hwan commented that it would be enough to feed at least 3 families for several months. But Kim Gi-doo corrected him, saying that it could last for years if managed properly. Without wasting any time, the 2 began filling bags and boxes with everything they could carry, grabbing rice, noodles, canned food, water bottles, gas cylinders, and various other items. Meanwhile, at the MBS station, a lone broadcaster was inside the studio, talking on the phone to someone, explaining that he didn't know how much longer he would be able to keep the broadcast going, and as time was limited, he couldn't afford to broadcast uncertain information. So everything he heard he wrote down carefully in a small notebook, trying to record as much as possible, until, during the call, he heard something that left him silent for a few seconds, and he wondered if it was really true. When he heard confirmation, he just kept quiet and hung up the call, thinking that he had heard the story before and hadn't believed it. But now, with new witnesses, there was no longer any doubt. The story was about a man on a motorcycle whom the zombies didn't attack and who had superhuman strength. At that very moment, Ai-hwan was carrying 2 sacks of flour weighing 40 kilos each, 1 in each arm, as if they were nothing, walking to the car with firm steps and a calm expression. Together, they had managed to gather enough food, water, and utensils to keep the group supplied for several months. And Kim Gi-doo, looking at the items in the trunk, commented that with that, they could last up to half a year. Ai-hwan then noticed a pharmacy across the street and said said that it would be a good idea for them to take the opportunity to look for medicines too, since no one knew when they would get another chance. Later, inside the pharmacy, as they rummaged through drawers and shelves in search of antibiotics and basic first aid items, Kim Gi-doo found himself feeling a little guilty for breaking into places and taking everything without permission, but Ai-hwan, with a serious look on his face, said that it was too late to feel that kind of remorse now, because the world they knew was over, and what they were doing was just trying to survive another day. After breaking into the pharmacy, Kim Gi-doo commented that it would take some time and asked Ai-hwan to keep watch at the door. And as he agreed without hesitation, Kim Gi-doo took the opportunity to remind them that they couldn't just go out and take everything they saw, so they decided to select only the medicines that would really be useful to the group. Meanwhile, Ai-hwan, standing at the entrance, looked into the distance and noticed the MBS building, which caught Kim Gi-doo's attention, who asked why he was looking that way, as if he was remembering Bezerra's death. But Ai-hwan explained that he was thinking about the broadcast they had heard that day on the MBS radio. Kim Gi-doo remembered that someone had actually mentioned that the studio was near there, perhaps a few blocks away, and asked if Ai-hwan was worried about that live broadcast. But they knew they didn't have time to deal with it now, because the priority was to help Gina's family and then find his sister. Kim Gi-doo stressed that they'd better get back soon to prepare, and Ai-hwan agreed, pointing out that he needed to find his sister as soon as possible. Later, back at the apartment, they had a modest rationed meal so that the food would last longer, and Gina's parents showed their deep gratitude. But Ai-hwan said they didn't need to thank him, because he hadn't just brought food, but also medicine. And if everyone ate sparingly, the supplies could last up to half a year for 4 people. Gina's father, confused, asked what he meant by 4 people, and it was then that Ai-hwan revealed that he had to leave, as he hadn't yet told them that he was going after his sister. Gina's mother asked if he even knew where she was, and Ai-hwan replied that she lived in Yangyang, so she would probably be there. Gina's father remarked that this was a very long way to go, and the roads would certainly be blocked. But Ai-hwan insisted that he had no choice, as he was the only family he still had, and Gina, upon hearing this, became visibly worried. Ai-hwan explained that he was talking about this now because perhaps if he managed to find and save his sister, he could bring her to live there with them, where it would be much safer, since he didn't know if there was another place as well protected as this one. He also commented that his sister was nothing special there in Yangyang, and since the zombies weren't attacking him, he was able to help other people, but he could only do so with peace of mind if he knew that Gina was there, safe and well. He assured her that he would save her sister and return, asking everyone to hang in there until his return. Gina's father said that, of course, he could bring his sister and that he would accept any request. But he took the opportunity to say that although he would allow them to go out together, he wasn't yet ready to allow them to get married, as Gina was only 20, which made her completely despair at that conversation, especially when her mother commented that if they had a grandchild soon, perhaps no one would be complaining, leaving Gina even more embarrassed and distressed. That night, Kim Gi-doo lit a candle she had brought from the market, explaining that without electricity, it was the only way to illuminate the room. And when Ai-hwan asked if Gina's parents were already asleep, she said yes, that they looked very tired. Kim Gi-doo commented that it was only natural, considering all the tension, worry, and hunger they had faced over the last few days. Then Ai-hwan noticed that he was writing something down and asked what it was. So Kim Gi-doo explained that he was calculating how much food they would need to get to Yangyang. Ai-hwan, surprised, asked if he was planning to go along, and Kim Gi-doo confirmed it, saying yes. Ai-hwan asked why he would go to such a dangerous place now that they had finally found a safe shelter. And Gina also tried to argue by saying that it was too risky, but Kim Gi-doo replied that he understood the risk, only that an important part of a reporter's job was dealing with danger, and that he still had a lot to learn about Ai-hwan himself, so he believed that if they were together, everything would be better. Kim Gi-doo said that he himself was an exclusive report, and recalled that it was Ai-hwan himself who had commented that they should listen to his opinions more. So he said that he wouldn't be a burden during the trip, because as well as helping out, he would also serve as a reliable source of news. Ai-hwan just sighed, taking that as an answer, and then Kim Gi-doo added that he had already traveled through those regions precisely because of his work as a reporter, so he knew his way around the main avenues and could point him in the right direction if Ai-hwan needed him to. When Ai-hwan commented that Clara trusted him, Gina took the opportunity to suggest that they also take a portable radio he had found, explaining that they never knew when new transmissions would be made, and that, with that radio, they could pick up information from various regions. Kim Gi-doo, surprised, asked when she had gotten the radio, but Gina insisted that it was important, as any new news could make a difference. While they were talking, the radio that Gina had brought started broadcasting again, and the broadcaster said that many people were curious about a certain man, because he had received several reports and testimonies that spoke of someone who rode a motorcycle and who, for some reason, wasn't attacked by the infected. Kim Gi-doo, intrigued, asked if they were talking about Ai-hwan, and soon the broadcaster commented that the first testimony had been recorded in the city of Incheon the day before, mentioning that the man on the motorcycle was clearly heading towards the city center. manner, and that he could be a key to resolving the current situation, being considered a possible hope in the midst of the chaos. Shortly afterwards, the MBS Midnight broadcast officially began, and the broadcaster explained that he initially had doubts about the veracity of the reports, but decided to investigate and confirm before releasing anything, knowing that too many testimonies could cause confusion. Even so, he said that he continued broadcasting alone, isolated in the studio, because he believed that perhaps that man was a small spark of hope in the midst of despair, and he wanted to give strength to people who were on the verge of giving up, saying that there was still hope and that salvation was on the way. At the end of the message, he introduced himself as just an MBS broadcaster, and trying to calm the heavy atmosphere, he put on some music. But as soon as he took off his headphones, it became clear that he himself was very shaken, clearly in doubt about whether or not to believe in that supposed hope he had announced. As they listened, Kim Gi-doo seemed to recognize the broadcaster's name and commented that he might even have his number saved in his cell phone. So he opened his contact list and confirmed that the number was indeed there. He said that he had met the man in a few interviews in the past and began to wonder if he had been trapped in the studio since the first day of the outbreak. Yi-hwan then asked if they were getting reports from other people on the radio and began to wonder if perhaps everyone already knew that he was the man on the motorcycle. Kim Gi-doo, surprised, asked if it was really true, and Ai-hwan confirmed that yes, the zombies really weren't biting him, but added that he didn't know why it was happening either, and for that reason, he didn't feel entitled to give people false hope, as he believed he wasn't qualified to carry that kind of responsibility. Kim Gi-doo said that he understood Yi-hwan's concern, but warned him that he needed to be more careful, because with the world the way it was, you couldn't trust anyone, and exposing personal information publicly could have serious consequences. Ai-hwan, on the other hand, replied that there was no need to worry about this kind of thing, as he believed that it was enough to act with caution. But the truth was that he was still unaware of the real danger of divulging something about himself in the middle of an apocalypse. As Kim Gi-doo saw that this was Yi-hwan's decision, he said that there was nothing he could do to stop it, so he decided to take the initiative of contacting the MBS broadcaster, believing that if he was the one who spoke, they would probably believe the story. He soon called Jin Cheol, who answered quickly, and Kim Gi-doo asked if he was the one broadcasting at that moment. Jin Cheol, relieved to hear his voice, asked if he was safe, and Kim Gi-doo replied that he was, and that he was calling because he had a very important testimony to share. Kim Gi-doo explained that the man on the motorcycle, who wasn't bitten by the zombies, was his colleague, which left Jin Cheol completely shocked. He apologized to the listeners of the broadcast, said that he had received an urgent call, and put another song on the air, stepping away from the microphone so that he could talk more privately. Then he asked if Kim Gi-doo was really sure of what he had said, because despite the numerous testimonies that had emerged, none of them had been confirmed yet. Kim Gi-doo firmly swore by his name that it was true, remembering that Jin Cheol had seen him interview important people, report in the middle of extreme cold, and even in front of fires. Jin Cheol thought that if Kim Gi-doo was the one saying it, then it must be true, and answered the phone saying that he only believed that story because he was the one saying it. Afterwards, Jin Cheol asked if they were really colleagues, which meant that the man on the motorcycle was with Kim Gi-doo at that moment. And Kim Gi-doo confirmed with a nod, saying that yes, he was there beside him. Jin Cheol then said that he had an important question, as the biker was becoming an extremely important figure for everyone listening to the broadcast, especially people who were in desperate situations. The idea of someone who couldn't be infected represented hope, so he wanted to know if it was true that he couldn't be bitten by zombies. Yi-hwan then replied that yes, he was that person, but that he also didn't know why that was, and explained that not only did the zombies not bite him, but they didn't recognize him as a target, as if they saw him as one of them, even though he wasn't. He also said that, although he had already been infected, he didn't know why. He also said that although he had already helped some people because of this special condition, he wasn't someone who could carry the responsibility of giving hope to everyone on his own, because he was still just a human being with many limits. Jin Cheol, after taking down all the information, said that he trusted Kim Gi-doo's word, but that he would only broadcast on the radio the facts that could be verified. He then asked how Ai-hwan could prove that he really wasn't infected. Yi-hwan replied by asking if there were many zombies around the MBS headquarters at that moment, and when he heard that there were, he said that he would go there himself to prove it. Kim Gi-doo, concerned, asked if he was really willing to go to the studio, and Ai-hwan confirmed it by saying that if that was what it took for them to believe him, he would go without hesitation. Jin Cheol explained that he was in the second studio, on the 8th floor, and Kim Gi-doo quickly warned that the station was completely surrounded by infected, but Ai-hwan assured him that everything was fine, that he would see Jin Cheol the next day. Before hanging up, Jin Cheol said that he would be waiting for him, and took the opportunity to tell Kim Gi-doo that he hadn't expected to see him again like this, asking him to take good care of himself. Kim Gi-doo replied that he would and that they would soon be together again. So Jin Cheol wished him good luck and ended the call, still wondering if the zombies really didn't bite that man or if they even recognized him as an ordinary human being. He still didn't know if he could really believe that story, but he thought that if it was true, maybe that man really was the salvation the world needed. So the next morning, while the weather seemed calm and there were no zombies on the streets, Ai Hwan commented that everything was very quiet, and Kim Gi-doo showed up already prepared, with his hoodie and backpack on his back, saying that he was going to accompany him on this journey. But before they left, Gina's mother approached with an emotional look on her face and handed Ai Hwan the rice dumplings she had prepared earlier, saying that they were for him to eat on the way, which made Ai Hwan very excited, as he loved rice dumplings. And she also wished him good luck, saying that she would be waiting for his return together with her daughter. At that moment, Gina approached with a slightly embarrassed face and a worried expression. And even though Ai Hwan said that she shouldn't worry because the zombies weren't attacking him, she ignored his words and hugged him tightly, thanking him sincerely for everything he had done for her up to that point and saying that he needed to come back alive. And then her father jumped into the conversation in a relaxed way, saying that for now there was no wedding, drawing a light smile from both of them before saying goodbye. Immediately afterwards, Ai Hwan and Kim Gi-doo set off together on the motorcycle towards the MBS studio, and when they arrived in the vicinity of the location, they already encountered a horde of zombies who were immediately greeted with sharp blows to the head because Ai Hwan was ready to eliminate each one of them with his baton in hand. This obviously drew the attention of many other zombies, and when he realized that the number was far greater than he had expected, Ai Hwan warned Kim Gi-doo to hide for the time being, as the confrontation would be too dangerous. So he took a deep breath, aware that it wouldn't be easy, but it was something he had to face. Even surrounded by zombies on all sides, Ai Hwan said in his mind that he was sorry he had to do that, but he had to get through. And on the other side, inside the MBS building, reporter Jin Cheol was completely exhausted, feeling the effects of extreme hunger and thirst, already without the strength to continue, thinking that perhaps it was near the end since the supplies had run out and he hadn't even managed to record a farewell message for his listeners. But even in that critical state, he still thought he had to at least confirm the story of the mysterious immune biker. It was then that, to his surprise, he received a call from Kim Gi-doo himself, and when he answered, he heard his voice saying that he was relieved that he was still alive, to which Jin Cheol, in a weak voice, replied that he was alive for the time being, and Kim Gi-doo said that he hoped he hadn't arrived too late, which left Jin Cheol confused, asking too late for what. But before he could hear the answer, strange sounds started coming from the other end of the line, which made him ask where exactly Kim Gi-doo was at that moment. The answer was immediate, and he said that he was right in front of the MBS building, which left Jin Cheol in shock, since the place was surrounded by zombies and was extremely dangerous. But then, Kim Gi-doo asked if he could make a video call because he needed to show something, and as soon as the image was shown, Jin Cheol was completely amazed to see, with his own eyes, Ai Hwan single-handedly exterminating all the zombies around him with absurd force, as if he were dealing with nothing more than rag dolls. While Kim Gi-doo, still in the car, said that it was too dangerous for him to get out of there, but that for Ai Hwan, it seemed to be just another ordinary obstacle. And after just a few minutes, the scene had been completely transformed, with all the zombies completely annihilated and the outskirts of the building cleared by the force of that man who, even alone, seemed to be more lethal than any army. Ai Hwan was visibly tired after defeating the horde, and even though he was breathing hard, he told Kim Gi-doo that it was now safe to get out of the car, firmly reinforcing that this situation was no joke, and that only someone like him could face it all alone. And in fact, no one else there would have the strength or courage to do the same. But then he took a quick look around and noticed a police shield lying on the ground, saying that it could also be useful. And Kim Gi-doo, seeing the opportunity, picked up the shield and said that it was actually great for them, and with the shield in hand, commented that there would probably still be a lot of zombies inside the building. But Ai Hwan reassured him that he just had to stay close and nothing bad would happen. And Kim Gi-doo, even though nervous, replied that inside the MBS building looked like a real labyrinth. But fortunately, he knew a bit about that type of construction, and Ai Hwan said he was counting on it. With everything ready, the two of them headed inside the building and began to move around the rooms. But contrary to expectations, most of them were empty, with no sign of zombies, which surprised both of them, since they hadn't encountered much resistance since they entered. And Ai Hwan, finding the total silence strange, commented that he hadn't heard any noise coming from zombies, while Kim Gi-doo also began to find it very strange, because the environment was much quieter than usual. And he wondered if perhaps the people there had managed to evacuate as soon as everything started. As they advanced, Ai Hwan began to think out loud, saying that he was curious about Jin Cheol, wondering why he kept transmitting in that kind of situation, even though he was probably without food, water, and surrounded by zombies. And Kim Gi-doo, trying to answer truthfully, said that he wasn't sure, but perhaps it was a very strong sense of responsibility, since he was originally in charge of transmissions and information. So perhaps he felt that he needed to keep doing it for the good of the people, as if it were his duty in this chaotic world. Ai Hwan, upon hearing this, said that he thought both he and Jin Cheol were incredible people, because even in an apocalypse, he was still able to be a real reporter, always trying to seek information, analyze the situation and find some way to help, while he himself, Yi-hwan, felt that he couldn't do anything related to his previous job, feeling a bit pathetic for no longer having a defined role. But at that moment, Kim Gi-doo gave him a gentle tap on the head with his shield and said that it was for Gina, because if she had heard what he said, she would surely have done the same, and then asked straight out who Ai-hwan thought would be the person who could live most comfortably in that world today. Kim Gi-doo said that Ai-hwan could have simply worried about himself all that time, trying to survive alone without getting involved with anyone. But he didn't do that. On the contrary, he helped other people, saved Gina, protected her all the way, and even took her back to her own family, as well as looking for Jin Cheol and getting to that point, even with all the risks. And he said that this wasn't something that just anyone could do because it required courage, empathy, and a rare kind of strength that many had lost in that world. Ye-hwan chose to help people because he believes it's the right thing to do, even in a world dominated by chaos, where most people just try to survive without caring about anything else, like those criminals who attacked Gina at the gas station. And even with all that, he continues to help out of pure empathy, which makes Kim Gi-doo indignant when he hears Yi-hwan call himself pathetic, because in his opinion, no one has done as much as Yi-hwan in this apocalypse, and he himself, together with reporter Jin Cheol, could guarantee this without any doubt. And on hearing these sincere words, Ai-hwan was visibly moved and thanked him. Soon after climbing several flights of stairs, they finally reached the 8th floor, where MBS's second studio was, and Kim Gi-doo asked if they could go down that corridor, so they cautiously opened the door and went through the quiet place. And Yi-hwan said that it seemed quiet there too, Kim Gi-doo agreed, while Ai-hwan tried to remember the instructions Jin Cheol had given him earlier, until they arrived in front of the door to Studio 6, at which point Kim Gi-doo said he was going to call him, but before he could do so, a zombie appeared behind him, ready to attack. It was at that moment that Ai-hwan, with his quick reflexes, stepped forward to protect him, but ended up being bitten instead of his friend, and with a firm movement, threw the creature straight into the elevator shaft, while Kim Gi-doo, frightened, asked if he was all right, and Ai-hwan, paralyzed by shock, could only think about the fact that he had been bitten and what that meant, believing that he was now doomed to transform, like all the other infected he had faced. Desperate, Yi-hwan asked Kim Gi-doo if he still had the gun they had brought, and Kim Gi-doo replied that he did, but he didn't understand the reason for the question until he realized what Yi-hwan was implying, and in a panic he questioned what he was intending to do, while Ai-hwan, with a determined look on his face, said that it was good that Kim Gi-doo had it just in case, because he still needed to finish off that damned creature that kept struggling nearby. However, when Ai-hwan approached to finish her off, he heard something that made him freeze. The woman was talking, asking him please not to kill her, saying that she hadn't done anything, and it was at that moment that Kim Gi-doo, completely perplexed, commented that it didn't make sense, since she had clearly attacked Yi-hwan seconds ago, but was now talking fearfully, as if she were no longer infected, which left them both confused. Yi-hwan, still cautious, took a good look at her and realized that the woman looked really scared, and even with everything that had happened, he said that it was dangerous to leave her there, and that they should take her to the studio to talk things over and see what was going on. But Kim Gi-doo, still reluctant, asked if he was sure about that, remembering that she had just bitten him, and even so, Yi-hwan replied that they couldn't just ignore her, because something was clearly different. It was then that Kim Gi-doo noticed something even more surprising, drawing Yi-hwan's attention to his own arm, because the bite mark had simply disappeared, as if it had healed itself, and this left them both completely shocked, because they had never seen anything like this happen before. Meanwhile, inside Studio 6, Jin Cheol heard all that noise coming from the corridor and wondered what was going on, until he received another call from Kim Gi-doo, who told him that they were already at the entrance and asked if he could open the door. And Jin Cheol, surprised to hear that they had actually managed to get there, said yes, that he was going to open it right now, and Kim Gi-doo, looking around, said that apparently there were no more infected around. Just that woman who until recently seemed to have been transformed. As soon as the door was opened, everyone entered Studio 6 and settled in, and both Jin Cheol and the rescued woman were immediately fed what was available, devouring the food like starving animals, which was completely understandable, since they had spent a long time eating nothing at all. Kim Gi-doo commented that for a whole week he had carried out 3 missions completely alone, dedicating himself body and soul to the whole thing. And Yi-hwan, seeing that everyone was safe and fed, said that now they could rest, eat, and drink as much as they wanted, and Jin Cheol, relieved, replied that that was more than enough for him, because fortunately he still had some food left over from the beginning of the apocalypse, and that compared to the rescued woman, he was in a much better situation, since she didn't seem to have eaten for more than a week. Meanwhile, Kim Gi-doo watched the woman with a certain suspicious look, trying to understand if there was something wrong, but she seemed to be acting normally, drinking water like any ordinary person. And soon after, she thanked him deeply, saying that it was Ai-hwan who had saved her life, and that she had no idea how she could return the favor. Then Kim Gi-doo, trying to better understand who she was, asked if her name was really Choi Suden, and if she worked at the station. But she said no, that she worked in a department store, and that on that fateful day, she was just just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Choi explained that, just as she was crossing the corridor, chaos suddenly broke out, and all she could hear were desperate screams and blood splattered everywhere. So she realized that something was very wrong and started running aimlessly until she came across a huge horde of zombies that soon caught up with her and bit her. And that, from that moment on, everything turned to darkness, as if she had been swallowed up by a deep sleep, a real coma from which she has only just begun to awaken. The atmosphere in the room became tense and completely silent until Jin Cheol, realizing that she was still emotionally shaken, approached her calmly and asked one more question, asking if she remembered absolutely nothing since the infection began and what her first clear memory was after all that. And Choi replied that her first memory was the voices of Kim Gi-doo and Lee-hwan, as if she was in a state of unconsciousness and started to wake up when she heard their presence, and from then on, everything started to become clearer. But she was still frightened by the fact that she felt a very strong taste of blood in her mouth, even now, and she also said that her mouth still felt bruised, as if there was some kind of wound there. Kim Gi-doo, surprised by this information, asked if it really tasted like blood, and looked at Lee-hwan, trying to confirm if that meant what he was thinking. And Lee-hwan, with a serious look on his face, said that she was probably exhausted, and that it would be best to let her rest. So the woman lay down on the studio sofa and fell asleep almost immediately, while Lee-hwan retrieved his coat, and Kim Gi-doo, still confused, asked if that meant that Choi had really been infected, because she had bitten him seconds before. Lee-hwan confirmed that yes, she had indeed tried to bite him, but soon afterwards she was fine, as if she had returned to normal and he himself had been bitten, but not infected. And on top of that, he had seen the wound disappear, as if it had never existed, which was something completely out of the ordinary. So Kim Gi-doo admitted that it was hard to believe, but Jin Cheol, with total seriousness, said that he did believe it, because after having seen with his own eyes Lee-hwan facing dozens of zombies on his own, there was no longer any room for doubt. Kim Gi-doo then shared that the situation had generated a hypothesis in his head, because no one knew exactly what had caused that catastrophe, and everything the government had tried to do with martial law had proved completely useless. So the most accepted theory among the survivors was that it had all been caused by a virus, probably transmitted through the air, a type of disease that infected people and turned them into zombies. But then he himself raised the question, if the virus spreads through the air, why haven't they been infected yet? Jin Cheol was also reflecting on the whole thing, but stressed that, although it sounded plausible, it was all just a theory, as there was no way of confirming it for sure, and explained that there may be people with a type of primary immunity that prevents infection through the air, meaning that even if they are in constant contact with the virus suspended in the environment, they don't develop symptoms, but even these people would still be vulnerable to bites, because the virus could be transmitted through blood or saliva, or even both at the same time. At that point, Jin Cheol raised the possibility that Lee-hwan was an even rarer case, a person completely immune to both airborne and direct contact infection, because his arm had clearly been bitten, was bleeding visibly, and yet at that moment when Choi transformed back into a human, he showed no sign of infection, which could indicate that his blood had somehow neutralized the virus inside her. Kim Gi-doo, thinking out loud, said that if this is true, Lee-hwan is not only immune, but represents the cure itself, as if he were the living vaccine against that disease. And Lee-hwan, surprised and confused, asked if they were saying that he was the salvation for that whole apocalypse. And Jin Cheol, trying to keep calm, said that it was just a hypothesis, but within everything they had seen so far, it was the only explanation that made any sense in the circumstances. Kim Gi-doo, his head spinning with so much information, asked for a moment to process, saying that he needed to recap everything to understand, and then he explained aloud that when Choi bit Lee-hwan, not only did she return to a human state, but Lee-hwan himself wasn't infected, and this probably happened because his blood came into contact with her system and somehow cured the virus, which led him to ask if it was even possible for a virus to be neutralized that quickly. Jin Cheol, experienced in analyzing information, replied that under normal conditions, this would be completely impossible, but that nothing in that situation was normal and that they couldn't ignore a hypothesis just because it seemed absurd, because the world was now absurd in itself. And if the theory was correct, it would also explain why the zombies never attacked Lee-hwan, since perhaps his body emitted some kind of signal or substance that drove them away, as if he was recognized by the virus itself as something that shouldn't be attacked, or as if his blood had the virus in an attenuated form, working like a live vaccine. At that moment, Lee-hwan asked them to stop for a moment, because if all that was true, if the infected could really be cured with his blood, it meant that all the people he had killed up to that point might still be saved, which led him to reflect with deep anguish that he had actually exterminated people who were only sick, and who would now never have the chance to return to normal, which made him feel like a murderer who had destroyed entire families without knowing it. Kim Gi-doo, seeing his emotional state worsen, tried to calm him down, but Lee-hwan, visibly shaken, went on to say that from the moment he woke up in this world, he had been knocking down and eliminating all the zombies that came his way, that he had already killed so many that he couldn't even count, and that all this time he was perhaps just erasing lives that still had salvation rather than protecting them as he believed he was doing. In the face of this, Kim Gi-doo firmly asked if Ai Hwan was listening and reminded him that even if he hadn't known all this before, he had already saved countless lives by stopping zombies from attacking more people, and that at that moment, no one there could blame him for not having done something he didn't know was possible, because he had no choice in the world, and all he had done so far was fight to keep the people around him alive. Kim Gi-doo reinforced that everything Ai Hwan had done so far was to keep people alive, because since the beginning of the apocalypse, he had seen all kinds of people, including monsters that were much worse than the zombies themselves, and that no one in that world had the right to judge him, since he wasn't hurting anyone. Quite the opposite, he was saving several lives while putting his own at risk. Jin Cheol, hearing all this, suggested that instead of continuing to discuss what might or might not be true, they should simply check it out for themselves and find out clearly what kind of existence Ai Hwan was, since he could take part in the broadcast that very evening. And on hearing this, Ai Hwan, surprised, asked if he really was going to appear on the radio program. Later in the evening, he made a video call with Kim Gi-doo, wanting to confirm that it was really true, and Kim Gi-doo replied that it was, that the broadcaster thought it was a great idea, at which point Gina, upon hearing this, commented that at least the most important thing they had already achieved, which was to get there alive, but Ai Hwan, even with all this, was still worried, because he didn't consider himself to be this incredible person that everyone thought he was, and he was afraid of giving the public false hope. Gina then replied that there was no one more incredible than him in the world, and maybe his sister was listening to the broadcast too, so he should do his best this time. And Ai Hwan, even a little embarrassed, thanked her sincerely for her words, and she said that she needed to save her cell phone battery so she could call him later, and Ai Hwan agreed, sending a hug to her parents, while his face was visibly flushed. Choi, noticing the tone of the conversation, asked in a casual way if Gina was his girlfriend, and Ai Hwan, embarrassed, said no. But Choi commented that the conversation sounded like something between two people who were very special to each other, and Ai Hwan, not knowing how to answer, asked if that was so. And Kim Gi-doo, laughing, said that no one else was being fooled by that story and that he should just admit it straight away. And Ai Hwan, embarrassed, asked if even he was saying that now. At that moment, Jin Cheol appeared and asked if Ai Hwan had had enough rest, because he was adjusting the last details of the broadcast, which was about to begin. And Ai Hwan, nervous, asked what if he ruined everything? What if he said something wrong live? But Jin Cheol calmly replied that they were in the middle of an apocalypse, and that in this kind of world, that wasn't something that mattered that much, and that Ai Hwan just needed to confirm its existence, because just the fact that that biker that the infected weren't attacking was real was already something that brought hope. Later, the broadcast finally started, and broadcaster Jin Cheol began his presentation by saying that he had received many messages from people, messages of encouragement and concern, and that in times as frightening as these, it was necessary to have a moment to ease the mind. So, as a way of repaying the support he had been receiving, he was there with a very special guest, the person everyone had been talking about for the last few days, biker Ai Hwan Yan. When it came time to speak, Jin Cheol asked him to introduce himself, and Ai Hwan, visibly nervous, began by saying that his name was Ai Hwan Yan, that he was 28 years old, and that before the apocalypse, he worked as a funeral director. And Jin Cheol commented that Ai Hwan probably already knew this, but that they had received many testimonies and reports about him, so he would begin with the most important question, the one everyone wanted to hear, whether it was true that the infected didn't attack him. Ai Hwan confirmed that yes, it was true, that the infected not only didn't attack or bite him, but didn't even seem to recognize his presence. And Jin Cheol, looking at the camera, said that he understood that it was hard to believe, but that he himself had witnessed it with his own eyes, and that he had previously considered something like this impossible, but after seeing it, he couldn't deny it. Then, based on the reports and testimonies received, he commented that Ai Hwan seemed to be traveling east, and asked if he had a specific final destination, to which Ai Hwan replied yes, that he was going to Yangyang as his family was there, and Jin Cheol commented that this was a great journey, and asked if there were any viewers from Yangyang listening to the broadcast at that time. During the broadcast, Jin Cheol received a new notification on his cell phone. It was another report coming from a listener, this time from the city of Soksho, and as soon as he saw the message, he was visibly shaken, which made Ai Hwan immediately ask what had happened, and Jin Cheol, still looking serious, explained that the person who sent the message was originally from Yangyang, but had evacuated to Soksho, because, according to her, the military had passed through Yangyang, and there was nothing left there. Hearing this, Ai Hwan was confused and asked what exactly it meant, and Kim Gi-do also intervened, asking how the military had passed by, wanting to understand if it meant that the city had been bombed. But Jin Cheol, trying to clarify, explained that, according to the information, the military had indeed carried out an operation in Yangyang. But the part about nothing being left was still ambiguous, and it wasn't possible to confirm whether it was referring to the city, the buildings, or the survivors themselves. So the most prudent thing was for them to check the facts carefully before jumping to conclusions. Kim Gi-do, still worried, asked if the military continued to move after this incident, and Jin Cheol confirmed that, in fact, at the beginning of the crisis, the military acted quickly, declaring martial law throughout the country on the same day that the outbreak began. But after that, there weren't many significant actions, and on the contrary, there were several reports that the military were fleeing the major metropolitan areas because of the collapse in traffic and the general lack of control, which only increased the desperation of the population. And probably the same happened in Yangyang. Even so, Jin Cheol said that there was still a chance that the residents of Yangyang had been rescued and taken to a safer place, perhaps even in a better situation than the one they were facing at the moment. So he asked Yi Huan not to lose hope, at which point Ai Huan, with a determined look on his face, told him that his sister had always liked listening to the radio since she was very young, and that they used to listen together to make the house less silent and more cozy, and that she said the radio made her feel less alone. That's why Ai Huan said with conviction that if his sister were alive, she would certainly be listening to that broadcast, and declared that regardless of how the situation was in Yangyang, he would go there anyway to find her, because that was what mattered most, and took the opportunity to tell her live, directly, that she wouldn't have to wait long, because he was on his way and would soon arrive to rescue her personally. After the end of the broadcast, Kim Gi-do thanked Yi Huan very much for taking part, explaining that there had been many messages of support and encouragement, as well as countless words of thanks from people touched by his story, and he said that even though he had started the broadcast a little sluggish, in the end, he had adapted surprisingly well, to the point of joking that he might do well in this kind of work. Yi Huan, a little embarrassed, replied that he was still too shy for that, but Kim Gi-do laughed and commented that live broadcasting is something you get used to quickly, and that as soon as the apocalypse was over, the whole world would want to interview the immune biker, so he should get ready, because he was going to become a global star. And he also said not to forget that he had the first exclusive interview with him. In this lighter mood, Choi, who was listening attentively, asked something that was bothering her, wondering why Jin Cheol hadn't mentioned during the broadcast that Yi Huan's blood had cured her, since this information could bring a lot of hope to the listeners, considering the despair many were in. Jin Cheol explained that he did it all for Yi Huan, because if the world found out that his blood was capable of healing people, no one would see him as a hero or a savior, but rather as a rare resource that would need to be controlled, used in experiments, or even kidnapped. And that's why it was essential to keep this secret for the time being, because in that situation, neither the government nor the military could be trusted, and it was much more important for him to focus on rescuing his sister before anything else. And Ai Huan agreed with everything he heard, but said he was going to take a quick walk around the station, saying that he hadn't checked the whole place yet, and maybe there were some more zombies around. So Ku asked what exactly he intended to do, and Ai Huan replied that he just wanted to check the surroundings, at which point Kim Gi-do called out to him, asking him to take the baseball bat with him, even though Ai Huan said he didn't need it, since it would be a quick check. Kim Gi-do insisted, saying that in times like these it was impossible to let his guard down, even with such strong feelings involved, and that he needed to protect himself until he could save his sister. So Ai Huan took the bat, thanked him and left, closing the door and leaving the others in silence. Jin Cheol then commented that Ai Huan really needed Kim Gi-do, because even though he was someone with super strength and immune to zombie attacks, he was still only 28 years old, with a soft heart and a sense of innocence that didn't fit in with the times they were living in, and that no matter how strong he was, he still wouldn't be able to move mountains on his own. And at that moment, Kim Gi-do, already downstairs, came across a zombie, but instead of attacking her, he hesitated and simply left her behind. While Jin Cheol went on to say that in an era as cruel as that one, it was inevitable that the heart of someone like Yi Huan would break several times until he got used to reality. And that was why Kim Gi-do's role was fundamental, because he needed to be by Yi Huan's side at all times, helping him to become stronger and stronger, since without his support, Yi Huan would never have made it this far. And Kim Gi-do himself agreed, saying that he would help, not only because of his exclusive interview, but also because he recognized Yi Huan as his benefactor. Choi, showing some anxiety, asked Kim Gi-do if he was really going to Yangyang together with Ai Huan, and he confirmed it, so she asked to go along, which Kim Gi-do found strange, asking why, saying that they would need to talk to Ai Huan as well. But he still wanted to understand why she wanted to go so much, and Choi said yes, there was someone in Yangyang waiting for her, and she was extremely extremely surprised when she heard that the group intended to go there, especially after the news that had come out about that region, because her father was the deputy commander of the 4th Armored Brigade and had been stationed precisely in Yangyang, which explained her nervousness when she heard about the destination of the trip. Meanwhile, Yi Huan remembered a moment with his sister when a humble-looking man, almost like a homeless person, thanked her emotionally for offering him money, saying that he felt bad for accepting it. But she replied with a smile that it was okay, that it wasn't much, but enough for him and his grandson to buy a meal. Ai Huan, who was watching everything in silence, asked her why she was giving money, even though she was struggling to pay for her own lunch. And her sister replied that she had recently earned some extra money, and that, at least for that day, she could offer food to the elderly. She explained that this gentleman went up the hill every week to collect recyclable waste, even though he didn't need to, just out of goodwill, and said that it was precisely this kind of attitude that showed how the world was still full of invisible goodness, the kind that didn't appear on the news, but which allowed people to live together as real human beings. And that was why she hoped that one day her brother would also become someone like that, someone with that same goodness in his heart. Then, as he looked at the messages he had sent and which had never been received, he remembered all that and, of course, felt a tightness in his chest as he realized that he might never have the chance to meet her again. And that thought made him even sadder in that silent moment. In the studio, when they got back to the subject, one of those present asked if that man was really the deputy commander, and Choi confirmed that he was, explaining that he was Colonel Young Cheol, who used to be stationed in Cheorwan, but last year was transferred to Yang, so her whole family moved to Yangyang, and she was the only one who remained in Seoul because of her job, which now made her extremely worried about her parents' safety, especially after seeing how the world had turned upside down in just 1 week. Kim Gi-doo thought that it made sense for her to want to get close to them, because perhaps she really would feel safer being by his and Yi Huan's side. And then something suddenly occurred to him as he remembered that if Colonel Young Cheol really did serve in Cheorwan until last year, perhaps he knew someone very important to them. Jin Cheol also commented that the idea of accompanying them to Yang wasn't a bad one, because if that report was true and there really was a military occupation in Yang, it would most likely have been led by the 4th Brigade itself, in which case civilians would be barred from entering. But with Choi being a direct relative of a deputy commander, the situation would change completely, and perhaps they would be able to get beyond the military barriers without too much difficulty. Jin Cheol reinforced that there would be no safer place for Choi than with the military, even if the journey there was extremely long and risky, considering Korean's current state of the world, but it was still a much better alternative than remaining trapped in that decaying city. Choi said she would only agree to go if they agreed, but her sincere wish was to be reunited with her family, and Kim Gi-doo said that was fine, that he would discuss it with Yi Huan later. Later, while he was eating the rice dumplings prepared by Gina's mother, Yi Huan was clear in saying that it was fine to take Choi with them, since if her family was also in Yangyang, he understood her wish perfectly, because he was also going there for his own sister, so there was no one better than him to understand that kind of feeling. Choi stood up and thanked them sincerely, promising that she wouldn't be a burden to them, and Yi Huan replied that there was no way she could be a burden. And then they all looked at Jin Cheol, waiting for his decision, and he explained that he would continue making the transmissions from there, trying to keep hope alive in people, but asked for something important before they left. He explained that their journey to Yang was something no one else was doing, and so he would like them to share information with him along the way, since despite receiving messages from all over the country, the data was always limited, and there was no one crossing as many regions as they were about to. Jin Cheol commented that, with most of the country's functions paralyzed, especially in the metropolitan areas, the movement of people was minimal, and if the army and government were still functioning in some way, it was quite possible that they would pass military bases in the various provinces they would cross, and so it would be a valuable opportunity to gather real information, capable of giving real hope to those who still followed their transmissions. Finally, he sincerely hoped that Ai Huan would succeed in finding his sister, and promised that, in the meantime, he would do his part from there, fulfilling his remaining role in this new world. Yi Huan said yes, that he would definitely come back with her, and later, together with Kim Gi-doo, they brought a lot of supplies so that Jin Cheol could stay there safely and not risk starvation, and those supplies were enough for at least a month. Jin Cheol was surprised by the amount, and asked if they were really sure about giving away so much food, since they still had a long journey to Yangyang, but Kim Gi-doo assured him that everything was under control and that, if they needed to, they could stop at another supermarket along the way to restock. Yi Huan explained that the 8th floor was now completely clean, with no more danger there, so it was safe for Jin Cheol to continue using that place as a base. Jin Cheol thanked him once again, calling Yi Huan his savior, and said that he sincerely looked forward to the day when they could meet again live. He and his sister, and Ai Huan, thanked him sincerely, while everyone there wished each other good luck before leaving. Watching them go, Jin Cheol thought that, from that moment on, he no longer had to pretend to hope, because now he really believed that things could get better. Outside, Yi-Hwan was already on the motorcycle, and the other two, Kim Gi-doo and Choi, were in the car. Yi-Hwan asked if they were ready, and they both put on their seatbelts, with Kim Gi-doo saying yes. Yi-Hwan then sped ahead on his motorcycle, followed closely behind by the car. As he drove, Yi-Hwan thought that his sister just needed to hold on a little longer because he was sure to rescue her. Meanwhile, in a quiet and peaceful house, a woman watched her daughter sleeping soundly and said that now that her mother was there, everything would be fine, and that they just had to wait a little longer because Uncle Yi-Hwan would soon come to rescue them. But halfway there, their journey was interrupted by a large avenue completely clogged with abandoned cars, which made it impossible to pass with the car, and even the motorcycle couldn't get through the piles. Kim Gi-doo commented that he had expected obstacles, but he hadn't imagined that they would come up against something so difficult right at the start of the journey, which meant that it would take them much longer than they had calculated. Choi suggested that perhaps Route 86 had fewer cars than that main avenue, and Kim Gi-doo replied that it really did seem like the best alternative at that moment, so he told Yi-Hwan that they would turn around and take the other road. However, Yi-Hwan didn't respond immediately as he was looking at a dead family nearby, and after a moment in silence, he turned around and said that it was fine, that they would take the new road. Taking the route towards Namyangju, Yi-Hwan had to deal with a few zombies that appeared on the road, and this was the pattern of the trip for a while. They moved on, stopped to eat, slept in the car overnight, and kept going even though he hadn't received any messages from Ishe, his sister, which worried him, but didn't stop him because he knew he had to keep going. After making a lot of progress, they came to another road that was completely blocked off, and Yi-Hwan asked if there were any other possible routes that way. Kim Gi-doo replied that yes, there were several routes, but the problem was finding one that was still open and that would lead to Yongyang as quickly and safely as possible. They could even try to take the main avenue, but it would be extremely dangerous, so they needed to look for an alternative with fewer risks. Yi-Hwan suggested that they make a short stop before continuing, as the place seemed very quiet, and Kim Gi-doo agreed, getting out of the car, stretching, and saying that it was good to get some fresh air before the next stage of the journey. Choi said she was going to use the restroom right there in the woods, just for a moment, and Kim Gi-doo asked if it was really safe to let her go alone, but Yi-Hwan replied that he couldn't just follow her while she did that kind of thing either, saying that the place looked lonely and peaceful, so she would probably be fine. Even so, Kim Gi-doo commented that it was difficult for a woman to continue traveling with them at that pace, since they were always in a hurry and hadn't even had time to organize themselves properly, and Choi was probably doing her best not to get in the way or cause any kind of delay. Yi-Hwan agreed with him, and while Choi finished taking care of what she needed there in the middle of the bush, she thought that perhaps it hadn't been the best idea to insist on going alone. But as it was her choice, there was no way she could complain now. But suddenly she realized that there was someone behind her, and when she turned around, she saw an armed man pointing a gun directly at her. The fright was so great that she screamed loud enough for the two of them to hear from the car, and immediately, Yi-Hwan grabbed the baseball bat and ran off in that direction. As soon as he arrived and saw the scene, Yi-Hwan asked what had happened, but was surprised when the man also pointed his gun at him and ordered him to drop it immediately. Without hesitating, Yi-Hwan dropped the stick on the ground, and the man, with a tense tone, asked what they were doing there in that area. Yi-Hwan, not understanding whether he was a soldier or just an armed survivor, thought that this guy didn't seem to be part of any troops, so why would he be so well equipped? The man repeated his question, and Choi, visibly frightened, remained silent. Yi-Hwan explained that he was with her, heard the scream, and ran over to check what had happened. The man said that there was nothing on that mountain and asked again why exactly they were there. Yi-Hwan explained that he was going to Yongyang to look for his family, and that this was the only possible route they could take, so they decided to stop there just to rest for a while, as the area seemed safe and deserted. After that, the man put down his gun, apologized for his aggressive approach, and said that he had seen strange movements on the mountain and thought they might be infected, which is why he had acted that way. He helped Choi to her feet and commented that he hadn't expected to find any survivors in that area. He then introduced himself as Jang Tae-hoon, and Yi-Hwan also said his name, noticing that, at that moment, the man seemed much more polite. Soon after, Kim Gi-doo shouted from afar, asking if everything was all right, and Yi-Hwan said yes, everything was fine. Jang Tae-hoon asked how many people were with them, and Yi-Hwan replied that there were only 3. The man then analyzed for a moment, reflected a little, and said that it looked like the 3 of them really needed a place to rest, so if they didn't mind, they could follow him to a place he knew. He explained that it wasn't exactly a comfortable place, but it was certainly better than spending the night out in the open, and as he was there alone, there were plenty of rooms available. Later, when everyone had gathered, Jang Tae-hoon told us that the place he was staying was a roadside hotel, which he had been lucky enough to find and use as a shelter ever since, and that it was a relatively safe place, despite the difficulties. He said that around 30 people lived there, including children, and Choi asked directly how many people there were exactly. Jang Tae-hoon replied that counting everyone, including the little ones. The total was 30. Kim Gi-doo commented that this was a large number for such an isolated place, and that the lack of stores nearby must have made food a constant problem. And Jang Tae-hoon confirmed that yes, food was always a challenge there. That's why he had gone out to that area himself, trying to find some supermarket or smaller store to get supplies. But the nearest town was completely overrun by the infected, making it impossible to get close to the central zone without putting his own life at risk. After a lot of searching, Jang Tae-hoon ended up discovering some warehouses in the area, located between the mountains, and by the time they were talking, he was already on his way to check the contents of these places. Kim Gi-doo commented that if the depots were well stocked, there would certainly be enough food to keep the 30 people in the shelter going for a long time, and Hwan asked if Jang Tae-hoon had really gone alone to get supplies, as it seemed an extremely dangerous task to do without support. Tae-hoon confirmed that it was dangerous, but explained that that was precisely why he preferred to go alone, since in these situations the most important thing was to minimize risks, and there was no point in sending several people to carry out the same task, especially when the group was already short of resources. Hwan, however, commented that it would be very difficult to carry enough food for 30 people without help. And soon after that, they heard footsteps coming from the woods, indicating that a horde of zombies was approaching. Jang Tae-hoon quickly asked everyone to retreat, saying that he would deal with it, as it was too dangerous to continue there. But he soon realized that Hwan wasn't retreating with the others. Seeing the horde coming, Hwan told Tae-hoon to save his bullets, as there would still be times when they would be needed. And in the meantime, he would take care of the zombies. Without hesitation, he picked up his staff and stepped forward. Jang Tae-hoon tried to warn him that it was too risky, but Kim Gi-doo interrupted him and asked him to trust Hwan, explaining that he was the reason he and Choi were still alive so far. Then, when the horde advanced against them, the zombies simply ignored Hwan completely, and Jang Tae-hoon was completely shocked by this, not understanding what was happening. Hwan grabbed one of the infected by the collar and threw him hard against a tree, and then began to annihilate the rest with brutal blows, using only his superhuman strength. Jang Tae-hoon was impressed by the scene, thinking that it was unbelievable how strong that man was. But even more surprising was the fact that the zombies didn't even try to bite him. Kim Gi-doo then commented that Tae-hoon probably hadn't listened to the radio recently, because although it was hard to believe, the truth was that the zombies simply didn't attack Hwan. After eliminating the entire horde, Hwan approached and said that even if they found a well-stocked warehouse, it would be practically impossible to transport enough food for 30 people without a vehicle. So he suggested that Jang Tae-hoon join them, as with the help of the car and motorcycle, it would be much more feasible to carry the supplies. Later, when they were arriving at the roadside hotel where Jang Tae-hoon was staying with the group, the car and motorcycle approached the entrance and were soon met by suspicious looks as the guards of the place, on seeing vehicles approaching, went on alert and pointed their guns in the direction of the new arrivals. But they realized they weren't zombies when they saw that the people were driving normally. Then Jang Tae-hoon quickly got out of the car, waving and saying that it was him, reassuring the guards and asking them to lower their weapons, saying that there was no danger and no need to be on guard at the moment. The guards asked if the man next to him was the captain and wanted to know who the other people were. Jang Tae-hoon explained that they were survivors who had helped him during the mission, and that together they had managed to locate a warehouse with plenty of food. He said that there were plenty of supplies inside, including several canned foods and packets of ramen, and that in the trunk of the car there was still a good amount more to unload. Then everyone began to help load the boxes, and Hwan, while observing the amount of supplies gathered, asked Tae-hoon if he really thought that was enough to feed 30 people, and Tae-hoon replied that this was emergency food, that they needed it urgently, and that if necessary, they could return to the warehouse later. He added that they had only managed to do all this thanks to the help of the 3 people who had accompanied him, showing that he was sincerely grateful for everything they had done so far. But Hwan replied that he didn't need to thank them again, he had done it before, and it hadn't been any trouble. Tae-hoon then said that he still wanted to introduce someone to Hwan, and it was at that moment that a woman approached, speaking loudly, and Tae-hoon commented that she had arrived on time, making Hwan wonder if that person was a doctor, since her clothes indicated something like that, and the woman asked Tae-hoon what had happened. The woman asked Tae-hoon what had happened, as he was supposed to be gone until at least the next day, and he explained that there had been some situations along the way, but fortunately he had the help of 3 people who were essential, as thanks to them they managed to find a hidden warehouse and bring all the food they needed, which solved the group's biggest problem for a while. Tae-hoon then introduced the woman as Dr. Han, who had been responsible for looking after everyone in the place since the crisis began. Han, who had been responsible for looking after everyone in the place since the crisis began, but she quickly tried to play down her own importance by saying that it was no big deal, that it was Tae-hoon who was really protecting people, and that she was only in her 2nd year of residency, so she shouldn't even be called a doctor with such formality. And Hwan, observing the way everyone treated Tae-hoon, thought that the man really did seem to be someone they all trusted deeply, since they even even called him captain, which made it clear that he was taking responsibility for protecting everyone in the place on his own. Han, curious about their story, asked how they had ended up there, and Ai-Hwan explained that it was a long story, that they weren't from that region. They were going from Seoul to Yangyang for personal reasons, and Dr. Han commented that it was indeed a long way, and the roads were probably in terrible condition, and Ai-Hwan confirmed it by saying that the roads were completely blocked. Han commented that this was really far away, and that the roads were probably in terrible condition, and Ai-Hwan confirmed this by saying that the main avenues were completely blocked, making it difficult to get around, and before they could continue the conversation, another person appeared, calling for the captain and warning that all the supplies had already been taken inside, which reminded Tae-hoon that they couldn't stay outside for long. So he asked Myung-ho to finish what was missing and said he would leave the rest to him. Soon after, they all entered the hotel, but Myung-ho seemed to have a slightly worried expression, and as the sun began to set and night finally fell, everyone was gathered around having their meal, as hungry as ever, now relieved that they finally had enough food and water for everyone. And Ai-Hwan noted that there were a lot of children there, and Tae-hoon confirmed it by saying that there were 9 in all. And even though from the outside the place looked like an ordinary hotel, inside it was more like a makeshift hostel, which luckily already had some supplies when they arrived, although it didn't last long. And now, after everything, Tae-hoon said that finding that group of people so generous was unbelievable luck, and that everyone there was sincerely grateful for everything the 3 of them had done for them. Ai-Hwan said it was nothing, but he took the opportunity to ask a question that had been on his mind for some time, because ever since he arrived there, he noticed that everyone called Tae-hoon captain. So he asked what exactly was the reason for that, and Tae-hoon, a little embarrassed, replied that he found that title a bit exaggerated, but that he accepted being called that as a form of comfort for the others, for being someone who took the lead in the midst of the chaos and started making decisions for the good of the group. And while they were still talking about it, another survivor appeared saying that Dr. Han was looking for Tae-hoon. Han was looking for Tae-hoon, so he called Ai-Hwan to go and talk to her together, since the subject was important and involved everything that had been happening since he arrived. During the conversation, Tae-hoon explained everything he knew to Dr. Han, who was very shocked to discover that Ai-Hwan hadn't been infected even in direct contact with zombies. And the most impressive thing was that the zombies didn't even try to bite him. And Ai-Hwan himself confirmed that he didn't suffer any kind of aggression from them, that he could walk among the hordes undetected, as if he were invisible, as if the zombies simply didn't recognize him as human. And while he was explaining this, Dr. Han was trying to absorb the information and understand it logically. Han tried to absorb the information and understand it logically, while Tae-hoon said that he could confirm with his own eyes what he had seen, because the moment he met Ai-Hwan, a whole horde attacked them. But Ai-Hwan took them all on with ease, and no zombie fought back or tried to bite him, as if they didn't see him as a threat or as a living being. Dr. Han commented that there could be some scientific or medical explanation for this phenomenon, but that at the moment it was impossible to be sure without doing a full examination, and added that she believed the outbreak was being caused by a type of infection, although there was still no definitive answer to the origin of the disease. And the Ai-Hwan then said that if it really was a viral infection, it would mean that it might be possible to develop a vaccine or even a cure. And Dr. Han said that this was true in theory, but with the country's infrastructure completely destroyed, it would be extremely difficult. And even if the Ai-Hwan had some kind of immunity, it would mean that it would be extremely difficult. Han said that in theory that was true, but with the country's infrastructure completely destroyed and no access to proper equipment, it would be extremely difficult. And even if Ai-Hwan had some kind of immunity, that didn't mean they could simply manufacture a cure from his body. It was at this point that Ai-Hwan took a deep breath and asked a new question, wanting to know what would happen if, instead of creating a cure, someone ingested his blood directly and was completely cured, suggesting that perhaps this person would even gain some form of power, which left everyone present quite shocked. And Tae-hoon wanted to know exactly what he meant by that. So Ai-Hwan explained that he had already been bitten by a zombie, and that on coming into contact with its blood, the person regained consciousness, becoming human again, although they woke up dehydrated, hungry, and sleepy, as if they had been in a deep coma the whole time they were a zombie. At that moment, Ai-Hwan discreetly approached Choi and whispered to her to keep it a secret that that person was herself, so she just nodded and pretended not to know anything. And Ai-Hwan went on to say that if his blood really did act like a vaccine, perhaps a real cure could be developed from it. And Dr. Han, although still skeptical as a doctor, said she couldn't take it as true without testifying for it. Han, although still skeptical as a doctor, said she no longer doubted what he was saying, especially after the help he had offered the group. But as a health professional, she couldn't take it as truth without witnessing it for herself. So she said it was necessary to do an experiment, although she made it clear that it was more of a request than an imposition. Tae-hoon soon understood what she meant, and Dr. Han revealed that if Ai-Hwan was willing, she could provide a guinea pig. And in fact, admitted that she had already prepared for this if the opportunity arose, and when they asked if there was an infected person right there in the building, Dr. Han confirmed that there was. Han confirmed that there was, although it wasn't a simple situation, as this person had been locked in the basement for 3 days, and at first everyone thought it was just the flu. But then the symptoms began to worsen until the transformation took place, and she attacked other people like a regular zombie, which forced the group to capture her and keep her isolated in the basement. Kim Gi-doo asked if this person had been bitten, and Dr. Han replied no, that there was no apparent external wound, which led Choi to wonder if the symptoms could have been caused by airborne contamination, and if this type of infection took longer to manifest, because until now she had never seen a case like that. Dr. Han explained that the reaction to the virus can depend on various traits of the person's constitution, and then asked Hwan if he would agree to try to cure the infected person using his own blood. And when he wanted to confirm if that was exactly what she was asking, she replied that yes, directly speaking, it was exactly that, and explained that if a person really is cured from his blood, this would confirm that Hwan is not only immune to the infection, but can also act as a living vaccine, a possible starting point for understanding the cure for the disease. And Kim Gi-doo, concerned, commented that even if Hwan isn't attacked by the zombies, this could still be too dangerous, as it wouldn't be acceptable to allow an infected person to bite him on purpose. And Dr. Han immediately replied that of course he wouldn't be able to. Han immediately replied that of course he would never allow something that risky. So he said that the plan was to use a syringe to take a small sample of his blood, which would be simple, and then inject it directly into the infected person's body. The real problem, according to her, was how to get close enough to the infected person to apply this sample safely, since it was impossible for anyone else to do this without being attacked. And so she relied on Hwan, since he was the only one who could walk among the infected without being noticed. And even though Ku tried to give Hwan reasons not to risk it, saying that it was too dangerous or that it could go wrong, Hwan replied that he was determined, that he would do it, because if there really was a chance of saving a life with this, he had to try, and he didn't see it as something difficult or a sacrifice, especially since it was he himself who had raised the possibility. That night, as the sky darkened outside, a guard who was watching the entrance celebrated that the captain had indeed returned and had brought enough food for the group. But Myung-ho, who was standing next to him, seemed distracted and didn't even answer. So the guard asked him if he was listening to something, or if he was simply in the world of the moon, complaining that it was difficult to talk to Myung-ho, until he stared at the car and the motorcycle, lost in thought, as if he was reflecting on something important, but without saying anything. Later, when everyone was close to the stairs in the elevator, Tyron asked Hwan if he was sure of what he was about to do, and made it clear that he didn't need to force himself into anything if he wasn't comfortable with it. But Hwan replied calmly that it was fine, that it wasn't a difficulty for him, and besides, it was he himself who had brought that information. So if there was a chance to help, he was willing to take on that responsibility without hesitation. Tae-hun then discreetly pointed to a little girl who was sitting further away and asked Hwan if he had seen her before, saying that the woman locked in the basement was the child's mother, and that the girl had witnessed her own father turn into a zombie and try to attack them inside the house. But luckily, she and her mother managed to escape in time, and for a while they were fine. But 3 days later, the symptoms began to appear in the mother, and even though she hadn't bitten anyone yet, the risk was too great, so Tae-hun had to act. He said he even thought about shooting the woman to protect the others, but when he saw the look on her daughter's face, he just couldn't do it. So he got a chair, sat the woman down, and pushed her down to the basement, where he locked her in to prevent her from hurting anyone. And since then, she's been there, isolated from the group, while her daughter was tricked into hoping that maybe one day her mother would return to normal. Choi was completely shocked by that story, as she couldn't imagine how such a small child could have gone through something so traumatic. And Hwan, looking at the little girl sitting in silence with her eyes full of tears, immediately remembered his own niece, which awakened a strong determination within him. And with a firm look, he said that that story had to come to an end, that that child deserved to have hope again, and that from that moment on, they were going to do everything possible to change that reality. Soon after that, with Hwan's blood sample ready to be used, a guard appeared to inform them that it was time to change shifts, and Tae-hun replied that it was time to take up his post again, so the group prepared to get some rest. And 2 rooms were separated so that they could spend the night in some safety and comfort, which made Kim Gi-doo celebrate excitedly, saying that it would be the first time in a long time that he would sleep in a real bed, no longer on hard floors or makeshift surfaces as they had been doing since the outbreak began. Tae-hun, before going up to take his guard shift, thanked them sincerely for everything they had done that day, said he was relieved to have gotten food for everyone, and wished the group a good night. And as soon as he left, Choi commented that he was an incredibly strong person, and that now she understood why everyone there depended on him so much. much. And Ye Huan, staring into the void, replied that that was what they called a true leader, someone who carries everyone's weight on their back and still keeps standing. It was at this point that Kim Gi-doo began to express his suspicion, saying that there was something strange about the place, and asked if anyone else had noticed, because although it wasn't a military base, the place had many similar characteristics, with well-organized defenses, reinforced barricades, firearms for everyone, and even well-defined shift changes. And just then, Myung-ho appeared out of nowhere and startled everyone by commenting that it was because of the captain. And when Kim Gi-doo questioned him about who he was and why he knew about it, Myung-ho explained that Tae-hoon had once been a soldier, leader of the 13th Division, and that all those weapons being used had been brought by him straight from the military base before he left it. And Choi, still intrigued, asked if he had any intention of returning to the army if the situation stabilized one day. But Myung-ho said that this was something she would have to ask him personally, because no one there had ever had the courage to question him about it. And in fact, he himself had never cared enough to want to know. And with that, he said goodbye and went upstairs, leaving the three of them alone in the corridor. Choi, still annoyed, asked if that place was really safe, and Kim Gi-doo replied that there were many things they still didn't know about that group, and then looked at Yi Hwan and asked if he was sure he still wanted to go through with it, because even if he came out of it physically okay, there was no way to guarantee that they were surrounded by trustworthy people. But Yi Hwan, looking again at the little girl who was still waiting for her mother in the corner of the room, replied firmly that each person there carried their own story, and that even if there were risks, he didn't care about that now, because at that moment, all that mattered was doing what was right. And he knew that helping that child was exactly that. That same evening, Tae-hoon was back on his feet, standing guard at the top of the building, observing his surroundings carefully, holding his gun firmly, and still with his old soldier's tag attached to the barrel of his weapon. He thought about everything that had happened up to that point, remembering with bitterness the day his battalion was completely taken over by the infection, and the many close people he had lost in that attack, because even though he had survived, the pain of those losses was still alive inside him. And as he mentally relived that tragedy, he felt a mixture of anger and frustration. It was then that Dr. Han approached and asked if he was doing the guard duty alone that night. And even though Tae-hoon was a bit closed off and in a bad mood, he turned respectfully to answer. And Dr. Han, concerned, asked if he wasn't pushing himself too hard, as she could see that he was tired, both physically and emotionally. Tae-hoon said that he could still hold out for quite a while, and explained that he wasn't the only one struggling there. So if there was anything he could do, he would do it without hesitation. At which point Han asked him how his dreams had been lately, also wanting to know if the nightmares were still frequent. But Tae-hoon only replied that he had gotten used to them, and that if that was the punishment for his sins, then it was a light punishment compared to what he deserved, prompting Dr. Han to approach him and ask him not to be so hard on him, because everyone there depended on him. After all, he was the leader of everything in the place, and Tae-hoon only replied that he hoped that was true. While in the background, Miro watched everything in silence and began to cause a certain amount of discomfort, because his strange and always attentive presence made the others suspicious, looking more like a stalker than an ally, and no one could quite understand who he was or what he was doing there. The next morning, the weather closed in and a heavy rain fell, making the day gray and heavy, while everyone was gathered in the cafeteria trying to drink coffee and warm up. And Kim Gi-doo commented that the rain didn't look like it was going to stop anytime soon, and that if they hadn't spent the night there, they would have faced serious problems. But he also warned that if they stayed another night, they could end up wasting too much time. So he asked what Ai Hwan thought, but Ai Hwan seemed distant, wrapped up again in his thoughts about the conversation he'd had with Lee, and remained silent for a while, before replying that, for the time being, it was better to watch how everything unfolded, because there were still matters he needed to resolve there before leaving. Soon after, Tae-hoon appeared and wished them good morning, asking if everyone had slept well, and Ai Hwan replied that they had, saying that thanks to him they had gotten a decent rest. But Tae-hoon said that it still wasn't enough to repay the favor he had received, to which Ai Hwan replied that he didn't need to worry so much. However, Tae-hoon insisted that the rain had started suddenly and it wouldn't be easy to get out of there in that state, so he suggested that it might be better for them to stay for another night. But Ai Hwan explained that unfortunately, they were in a hurry and didn't have the luxury of wasting time, and that he would still keep the promise he had made before leaving, wanting to try to use his blood on the infected woman. Tae-hoon accepted the decision and asked him to follow him later to the basement entrance, and when they arrived in front of the locked door, he handed Ai Hwan a flashlight since it was very dark in there, and then Dr. Han approached and handed him the important item, a syringe containing Ai Hwan's blood, explaining that all he had to do was pour the contents into the infected woman's mouth to try and cure her. And then Ai Hwan said he was ready, asked everyone to stand back because it could be dangerous, and went in alone, closing the door behind him. Tae-hoon commented that Ai Hwan seemed strangely calm as he did this, as if he had been through something like this before. And Kim Gi-doo explained that he had indeed done similar things before, as helping others was something he had always been used to doing. So when Ai Hwan approached the infected woman, she didn't have any aggressive reaction, and he just introduced himself calmly and said that she would soon be back with her daughter, asking for patience for a moment longer. Outside, the atmosphere was tense, and everyone was very apprehensive, as the absolute silence inside the basement caused concern. But Taehoon said that if everything was silent, that was a good sign, as it meant that Hwan hadn't been attacked, and everyone hoped that he really was immune. Meanwhile, Kim Gi-doo seemed distracted, immersed in his thoughts, and Taehoon noticed this and asked him what was worrying him so much. But he said it was no big deal, just commented that Hwan might seem tough on the outside, but he was one of the most sensitive and kind-hearted people he knew, and that he never hesitated to help others, even if it meant putting himself at risk. Kim Gi-doo explained that when Hwan couldn't save someone, he was devastated because he put all the blame on himself, and it consumed him inside, and Dr. Han commented that perhaps they had asked too much of him at that moment. But Kim Gi-doo replied firmly that no, because that was a decision made of his own free will, and no one forced him into anything. The conversation was suddenly interrupted when the basement doors opened and Hwan appeared, asking for help from the doctor, who quickly approached and asked if he was hurt, but he said it was nothing to do with him, just explained that the woman was very thirsty, so she was taken straight to the infirmary, where they were relieved to see that, despite being exhausted and showing signs of fever, she was fine and fully conscious, and above all, she was human again. She asked if anyone had been hurt, but Dr. Han assured her that there had been no incident, and said that Hwan had managed to handle everything perfectly, and the woman, still weak, blamed herself deeply for everything, saying that they must have had a lot of work to do on her account, and that she felt bad for not being able to stop the infection or save anyone, and ended up crying right there, feeling completely useless for depending on others all the time. Taehoon then approached her, put his hand on her shoulder gently, and said that she had done everything she could, and that without her presence, they would never have been able to convince Hwan to make that decision. So in the end, it was she who had saved them all, and the woman, moved, thanked him sincerely. Later, when she woke up again, she asked if it was that Hwan guy who had saved her life, and Dr. Han confirmed it, saying that he was outside, as he had commented that he needed some fresh air. And at that moment, he was watching the rain fall silently, and Choi spotted him and wondered why he was so close to the rain. Hwan ended up noticing that the woman had also changed her clothes, and Choi explained that that was what they had managed to get for her, while Hwan began to feel tired, realizing that now that all the adrenaline had worn off, his body seemed much weaker than he had expected, and he confessed that he was more tense than he looked, because all the time he was worried that things wouldn't turn out the way he wanted. But Choi replied that he had saved a life, even if the woman didn't remember everything. That was proof that he was the last hope of that world. Hwan said that he didn't think it was all that, but Choi pointed out that no one knew that it was he who had cured the woman, and that at that moment, everyone was believing that the infection had disappeared from her body by itself. But soon, this would become a debate between everyone in there, and before that happened, Choi wanted to give two pieces of advice, one for the whole group and one just for him. Later, during a meeting, the question came up about keeping everything secret, and Choi said that he had thought about it a lot and believed that it was in fact the best decision to make. But Taehoon wondered if it wouldn't be better to tell everyone the truth, as it might give those people hope. And while everyone looked at each other in silence, Choi explained that that was exactly why he was worried, because if everyone found out that Hwan's blood was capable of curing infected people, it wouldn't be long before they started fighting to control it. Her words left the others shocked, and Choi went on to say that even though everyone there had suffered greatly, and even if there was a way to save the infected, the priority at that moment should be Hwan's safety. Because if the general public found out about his ability, chaos would ensue immediately, with desperate people trying to take his blood by force. And even though he was strong and able to deal with various threats, it would only take a few people armed with firearms for the situation to become uncontrollable. Kim Gi-doo then understood exactly what Choi was trying to say, and reflected that, at the end of the day, the biggest threat in an apocalypse was not the zombies but the surviving humans themselves. And he had never thought about that before, but now he realized how attentive and aware Choi was of the risks, and she added that she hated to think that way, but it was something she couldn't ignore. So until they were 100% sure about the safety of the situation, they couldn't take any chances. Choi asked everyone to be honest with themselves, questioning whether they would really be able to keep it a secret and protect Hwan safely. And even though everyone there was determined, she explained that it wasn't a question of doubting them, but of recognizing that they needed to be careful in such a delicate situation, because Hwan was, at that moment, everyone's hope. Kim Gi-doo thought that Gina probably shared the same concerns, because if anyone found out that Hwan's blood was a cure, they would surely try to capture him at any cost. And he also thought that, as far as firearms were concerned, that shelter already had several of them, which could make everything even more dangerous if the truth came out. If Dr. Han remained silent for a few seconds and then said that she agreed with everyone, explaining that she trusted the people there, but she knew that if this information spread, it would only bring more chaos, because everyone in the place had been hurt in some way, and spreading the word could have the opposite effect to what they had hoped for. So she promised to keep it a secret for everyone's safety. Hwan thought for a while, and then asked the doctor something, wanting to know if there were enough medical supplies in the shelter. And Dr. Han answered sincerely that, at the moment, what they had was very little, although Tae-hoon had managed to get some items from a nearby clinic, but that it was still far from what was needed. So she asked the reason for that question. And Ai-hwan explained that before leaving that place, he wanted to help as many people as possible. He asked the doctor to prepare a list of everything they needed in terms of medical supplies, as he would try to bring everything he could to help them. And later, even as the heavy rain continued to fall, Dr. Han handed the list to Kim Gi-do, still worried, asking if everything was really all right, as the city was overrun by infected. But Kim Gi-do replied that he knew the risk they were taking, but it was necessary to ensure the safety of everyone there, and if there was a chance to help, then they couldn't waste it. The three of them shared the same thought, and he asked the doctor not to worry so much, because as well as being armed, the most important thing was that they had Yi-hwan by their side. At that moment, Myung-ho approached and told them that the firearms were ready, and Tae-hoon thanked him, apologizing for having come all that way in the rain, but he still wanted to confirm that he was really sure about it, since it was dangerous for everyone. But Myung-ho said that he knew the risks and that he wanted to help however he could, because everyone there needed support, so Tae-hoon thanked him sincerely, and Kim Gi-do confirmed that they were already preparing to leave. Dr. Han and Choi wished the group good luck before they drove off in the rain, and as they watched the vehicle drive away, Choi tried to reassure the doctor that she didn't need to worry so much, as Yi-hwan would surely keep everyone safe, but she still couldn't disguise her concern. Then Choi, trying to bring up another subject, asked if she was close to the captain, and when the doctor wanted to know what she meant by that, Choi replied that she was even jealous, especially because of the way Tae-hoon looked at her. Meanwhile, inside the car, the conversation took the same turn, with the others teasing Tae-hoon, asking about his relationship with the doctor, and he quickly said that it was a misunderstanding, explaining that he and the doctor were not as they had imagined. Kim Gi-do said that there was no point in trying to hide it, because as a reporter, he was great at finding out this kind of thing. And even though Tae-hoon insisted that she was just someone close and important to him, but not like that, Kim Gi-do replied by saying that he knew exactly what kind of closeness that was, because when a man and a woman got that close, certain things ended up happening, leaving Tae-hoon completely unfazed by the direction of the conversation, while Myung-ho, with his always mysterious expression, remained silent. Soon after, the car finally reached the city, stopping in front of the address the doctor had mentioned, and they commented that it was easy to find because the hospital was huge. Kim Gi-do noted that, fortunately, the surrounding area seemed quiet, so all they had to do was walk carefully. Yi-hwan was the first to get out of the car, and after a brief check of the surroundings, he confirmed that everything was safe so far and that it was even better than he had expected. They quickly entered the hospital, which, although quiet, was pretty trashed, with messy corridors and overturned rooms, and Kim Gi-do asked if Ai-hwan had found anything, to which he replied that he had, but that he couldn't say exactly what was useful, since he wasn't a doctor like the doctor, and so he decided to take everything that seemed minimally important, trusting that she would be able to identify what was worthwhile. Myung-ho, who was also rummaging through drawers and cupboards, found something suspicious, a padlock with a key still attached, and when Tae-hoon approached and asked if he had found anything, Myung-ho quickly closed the drawer firmly and said he hadn't found anything, discreetly hiding the padlock, as if he had some plan in mind to use it in a dubious way. After they had finished searching the lower floor, the group began to climb the floors of the hospital in search of more supplies, and on the 8th floor, Kim Gi-do commented that there was only one more to go, but his body was already exhausted, while Tae-hoon, although tired, said that they had come further than he had expected, noting that on that floor, there were two main wards, one for internal medicine and the other for surgery. So the group decided to split into pairs to search the floor more thoroughly, with Tae-hoon going with Kim Gi-do, while Ai-hwan followed alongside Myung-ho. And during the search, Kim Gi-do commented that the corridor was quite dark, to which Tae-hoon replied that he would be there to protect him, and Kim Gi-do, trying to lighten the mood, said that anything was just a matter of shouting, and Ai-hwan confirmed that everything was fine, keeping his focus on the mission, while Myung-ho, with his apathetic gaze and blank expression, followed in silence. Kim Gi-do searched the rooms and commented that he hadn't found anything very useful so far, but Tae-hoon managed to find some medical supplies, probably the most they could carry in that situation, and commented that the day before they had been so worried about the base's supplies that they hadn't even thought to get snacks for the children, and he imagined that they would be happy to see that kind of food now. Trying to break the tense atmosphere, Kim Gi-do brought up the subject and said that he had heard rumors that Tae-hoon had served in the army, and even though he realized that he was touching on something delicate, he apologized in advance for bringing up the subject, especially when he saw that Tae-hoon remained silent. Tae-hoon replied that he had never wanted to hide it, but that it wasn't an easy story for him either. So Kim Gi-do cautiously asked if he could find out what happened, and Tae-hoon, after taking a deep breath, said that it was very difficult, but that perhaps he didn't have the right to keep it all to himself. He said that, at one point during the outbreak, he was forced to kill his own subordinates with his bare hands, and that this made him see himself as an unforgivable sinner, because everything happened so quickly that he barely had time to process what he was seeing, as everyone around around him started acting strangely and violently, and the situation got completely out of control. With no alternatives, and being attacked by people who until recently had been his companions, he was forced to react with gunfire to ensure his survival, even though he knew they were precious to him. And in the end, he escaped alone, grabbing what ammunition and weapons he could, and making his way to where he was now. He said that, after all that, he no longer considered himself a soldier, but that he was still facing his own inner judgment, because, despite everything, many people now depended on him, and he couldn't just disappear or run away from his responsibilities because he felt he still had to do his duty. Kim Gi-doo, hearing this, understood that Tae-hun was a survivor burdened with guilt, but with a strong sense of justice and responsibility, and finally understood why he got on so well with Yi-hwan, since deep down the two of them were alike, people marked by trauma who nevertheless continued to fight for others. Kim Gi-doo apologized for touching on such a sensitive subject, saying it was a journalist's bad habit, but Tae-hun said it was alright, and Kim Gi-doo thought that, after going through all that, still seeing that man looking after all the survivors with such dedication explained why everyone called him captain with such respect. However, while he was thinking about this, a memory nagged at him. He remembered someone saying that Myung-ho was a deserter, and now this enigmatic figure was alone with Yi-hwan, which gave him a warning feeling in his mind. And Yi-hwan was carefully investigating the place, quickly realizing that the place had already been prepared for an evacuation, as most of the supplies and useful objects had already been taken away during the crisis. So, after noting this, he informed Myung-ho, who was standing at the end of the corridor, that there probably wouldn't be much left on that floor. But to his surprise, Myung-ho approached slowly, with a rather strange look on his face, and decided to ask an unexpected question. Myung-ho, keeping a serious and suspicious expression, asked Ai-hwan if it was he who had cured that wounded woman who was trapped in the basement. And on hearing this, Ai-hwan was completely surprised, not understanding how he had come to that conclusion, quickly replying that the woman had recovered thanks to Dr. Han. But Myung-ho, still staring at him firmly, said that he knew very well that it was he who had cured her, and that Ai-hwan had probably decided to hide this information to avoid causing panic in the group. At that moment, Ai-hwan wondered since when Myung-ho had become so observant and perceptive, but tried to calmly explain that there was an important reason for keeping this a secret. However, Myung-ho, with an acid and bitter tone, replied that there was always a justification, since all the decisions in that place were made exclusively by the captain, including the rules that they had to follow without question, like mere obedient pawns, and then asked if Ai-hwan didn't realize this situation. Suddenly, Myung-ho raised his gun and pointed it directly at Ai-hwan, saying coldly that he was tired of it all. And before Ai-hwan could react or try to stop him, a shot was fired, echoing loudly around the room and drawing the immediate attention of the other two, who were far away at the time. When he heard the sound of the gunshot, Tae-hun immediately asked if anything had happened to Ai-hwan, but before he could answer, he noticed that Myung-ho was coming towards them with an evil grin on his face, quickly locking them in. Tae-hun then worriedly asked what exactly Myung-ho was doing, while Myung-ho sarcastically told the captain to be quiet, since the place was empty, taking the opportunity to use a padlock and lock them in for good. Myung-ho even added coldly that they should be grateful to him. After all, he had just eliminated that monster before it completely transformed. But meanwhile, elsewhere, inside the hotel, one of the guards commented worriedly that the rain was very strange, heavy, and inconstant, and at this rate, not even the zombies could move properly. This guard then commented to his colleague that he didn't need to be exposed in the rain. He just needed to stay in the protected entrance. But the other guard noticed something strange when he checked his gun, noticing that its cartridge was completely empty and without any ammunition. Confused, he asked who had used that gun before, and when he found out that it had been Myung-ho, he was intrigued and worried, wondering if there had been a mistake or failure during the shift change. On the other hand, at the hospital, Tae-hun was pounding on the door, demanding that Myung-ho open it immediately, while Kim Gi-doo was desperately asking what he had done with Yi-hwan, but Myung-ho, indifferent to the questions, just complained that they were too noisy, pointing out that he could just shoot them right there and leave. But he preferred to save ammunition and leave them trapped, justifying his actions by saying that he had no choice but to kill that monster before it was too late. At that moment, Kim Gi-doo, furious and indignant, shouted at Myung-ho, saying that he had no idea how big a mistake he had made, literally destroying the last hope they had of saving humanity, which would certainly bring the whole world to an end. But Myung-ho responded ironically, saying that he would prefer the world to continue in exactly that way, making it clear that he no longer cared about any of it. Tae-hun, perplexed, asked the reason for this attitude, but Myung-ho simply turned and replied that dead people can't do anything. But as he said this, without realizing it, Ai-hwan's body began to move slowly, until his eyes opened abruptly, revealing an intense glow, characteristic of a zombie's eyes. Meanwhile, Tae-hun was still desperately trying to free himself from that makeshift prison, and the more rational Kim Gi-doo advised him to stop, explaining that they would never be able to open it that way, and that they needed to think calmly about a viable alternative. But Tae-hun, overcome with guilt, fault, said that it was all his fault, as he should have noticed earlier that Myung-ho was unreliable. Apologizing sincerely for putting them in such a critical situation, Kim Gi-doo tried to reassure him, stressing that there was no way he could have predicted that Myung-ho would do something so terrible. And he realized that, in fact, he had planned everything carefully, handing over unloaded weapons and making sure the car keys were left behind, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to betray them. He then pointed out that if Myung-ho returned to the hotel like that, everyone else would be in serious danger too. At that moment, trying to find a quick solution, Kim Gi-doo suddenly remembered that he had a gun, revealing to the surprised Tae-hoon that he had a revolver with him. Then, when asked where he had gotten the gun, he quickly replied that he would explain everything later, because now they urgently needed to use that revolver to break the lock and escape as soon as possible. Kim Gi-doo held the revolver steady, preparing to take careful aim at the padlock that held them captive. But at that moment, Tae-hoon warned worriedly that the bullet could easily ricochet and hit one of them, putting them at risk. However, before the shot was fired, a sudden shadow covered them both, and as they looked up, they realized that Ai-hwan was standing in front of them with a serious wound to his stomach, bleeding profusely, while he seemed lost in thought. In that brief moment, Ai-hwan clearly recalled the exact instant when the shot hit his body, reliving the scene through that strange zombie eye that was now shining brightly in his face. And then, without saying anything at all, he simply grabbed the padlock with unconscionable force, easily pulling it off with his hand and making his way to freedom. Immediately, Tae-hoon and Kim Gi-doo, confused, asked what he was doing, but Kim Gi-doo quickly decided that since they were free, they needed to get out of there as soon as possible. Meanwhile, at the hotel, a critical situation had arisen. The first guards protecting the place were already dead, and Myung-ho had taken them all hostage, completely dominating the situation, while arrogantly stating that the old leadership no longer mattered, as no one had anywhere to run to at that moment. At that moment, the doctor tried to confront him, asking why he was doing all this, but Myung-ho, with a dark and cold expression, replied that he was establishing new rules, as he was finally the leader, and no one else could give him orders, allowing him to create his own paradise. The doctor then asked what he had done with Tae-hoon, but this question deeply irritated Myung-ho, who hit her in the face with a strong slap, aggressively questioning why she still insisted on caring so much about that man, the captain, since everyone around her only talked about him and cared exclusively about. Completely out of control and overcome with jealousy, Myung-ho continued to complain that the captain was always put first. Despite being someone who had shot his own soldiers before fleeing, unable to understand why everyone preferred to follow a man like him, and why he was so much better than himself, Myung-ho then vented that he should have killed Tae-hoon in exactly the same way as he had shot that other mutant in the face. And upon hearing this, the doctor asked in horror what exactly he had done with Ai-hwan. Myung-ho, in a sarcastic and cruel tone, replied that he knew Ai-hwan was the supposed cure for zombies, but that didn't matter anymore, as no one would ever see him again. However, at that very moment, under the heavy rain falling outside, Ai-hwan was walking slowly towards the hotel, wounded and bleeding badly, but determined to finish off the next prey he met along the way. His vision was completely filled with red, as if he were seeing the whole world through a bloody mist, and even though his body was full of intense emotions and accumulated rage about to explode, his mind remained strangely calm and focused. As he advanced, Ai-hwan felt something even stronger than the pain, a deep and frightening hunger, as if he were about to lose control of himself and become what he feared so much. But his mind insisted on remaining lucid, leading him straight to the place where he had to confront the person responsible for all that suffering. At the same time, still inside the hotel, Myung-ho continued talking to the doctor, trying to justify his behavior. He explained that, at first, he had never really hated the captain, and that he had even tried to like him in his own way. But overcome by a deep resentment, he questioned why the captain always forced people to work so hard for him, leaving the doctor even more confused when she heard those words, not understanding exactly what he meant by them. Tae-hoon always trusted and cared a lot for everyone, especially Myung-ho, who was the only one of the same age as him in the place. He cared more about Myung-ho than anyone else, something that Myung-ho himself recognized. But that was exactly why he hated him. Myung-ho believed that Tae-hoon acted as if he were superior to everyone else, underestimating everyone around him as if they were just children simply because everyone called him captain. This arrogant attitude had already worn Myung-ho down, feeding him a deep sense of rejection. Choi then asked if it was precisely because of this inferiority complex, this imposter syndrome, and this desire to be called captain, that he had done all that. Choi said that he was just a pathetic human being, which made Myung-ho react aggressively, pulling her by her clothes and asking if she really wanted to die. He made it clear that he wasn't going to take it easy on her just because she was a woman, and that if she wanted to live, she would have to act like the insect she was. However, Choi was not intimidated, making it clear that she was the daughter of a colonel and would not bow her head to a brat like him. She also pointed out that she had already died once, and dying again didn't scare her. It was better to die again than to obey a coward like him. Myung-ho, surprised by her courage, admitted that he really needed to reduce the number of people people who would be consuming resources that month and announced that he would kill everyone present, filling the place with bodies. While everyone was terrified, they heard someone approaching. It was Ai Huan, who was firm and determined despite everything. On seeing him, Myung-ho panicked, as he believed he had already killed Ai Huan before. Frightened, he tried to shoot him, but was stopped by the women present, who held him firmly. Ai Huan took advantage of the situation, rushed forward, and threw a powerful punch at Myung-ho, knocking him away with such force that he fell on the other side, his face seriously injured. Choi ran to Ai Huan, worried about his condition, but he ordered everyone to evacuate that floor immediately. Choi and the doctor followed his instructions and began evacuating people, while Ai Huan slowly approached Myung-ho, noticing something strange happening to him. His heart was beating slowly, his mind was empty, and he felt only a desperate, almost maddening hunger. At that moment, in the hospital, the two companions were commenting that Ai Huan had probably already arrived at the hotel. Tae-hun confirmed that the journey had taken less than an hour, but explained that they hadn't been able to leave due to a horde of zombies appearing in front of the place, in addition to the zombies themselves who were rapidly filling the hospital. Tae-hun asked Kim Gi-doo how Myung-ho could have turned out like that. Kim Gi-doo reflected, mentioning that Myung-ho had never been a very sociable or talkative person, but he had also never caused trouble or tried to pick a fight with anyone. Tae-hun then suspected that Myung-ho had been planning that attack all along. Kim Gi-doo added that it is in extreme situations, such as an apocalypse, that people's true nature is revealed. Even those you trust the most can have a dark side unknown to everyone. While they were discussing this, a large horde of zombies was slowly approaching the hotel in the heavy rain, further increasing the danger of the situation. As he lay on the ground, seriously injured, Myung-ho began to beg for mercy, desperately pleading for Ai Huan to listen to his words, claiming that he hadn't meant to do all that on purpose, but had simply collapsed under the weight of the extreme stress he was under on a daily basis. Myung-ho tried to justify his actions by explaining that they had been in that hellish situation for a long time, always living with the constant fear of being bitten, killed, or starving to death, which, according to him, could drive anyone to despair and make someone lose their mind. However, while he was trying to convince Ai Huan with his words, Myung-ho was only taking advantage of his opponent's distraction, who was standing still with an empty and thoughtful mind, to slowly reach for a stick that was next to him. At the exact moment that thunder rumbled in the sky, Myung-ho suddenly attacked, but after hitting Ai Huan with the stick, he realized that he hadn't even reacted to the blow. Seeing that the attack had had no effect, Myung-ho took advantage of the moment to flee quickly, running to reach his weapon, which was lying on the ground, while Ai Huan, still motionless, just watched in no hurry. As he desperately fled, Myung-ho began to complain aloud, expressing his frustration at believing that the life of that mutant was extremely easy, since he didn't have to worry about hiding or being bitten by zombies, while he himself had to fight every day to survive in that unjust and cruel world. In the midst of his despair, Myung-ho grumbled about how the apocalypse had only intensified inequalities, because even in such a devastating scenario, the strongest continued to prevail, while ordinary people like him were discarded and forgotten. He then fired several times at Ai Huan, who received the shots without showing any reaction or intention of defending himself. Inside the building, people could clearly hear the shots and remained frightened, not knowing what exactly was happening outside. Myung-ho then moved even closer to Ai Huan, revealing that, despite all the injustices and horrors he had witnessed, he had discovered a certain pleasure in this new world, because there were no more expectations or judgments about appearance, clothes, curriculum, or anything related to the past. For him, that chaotic world had already been ruined long before the apocalypse, so nothing had really changed. Everything was still as horrible as it had always been. Ai Huan, for his part, remained confused, trying to understand what Myung-ho was talking about, since his words seemed to make no sense at all, sounding only like cries of despair and madness. However, something was still intensely troubling Ai Huan's mind, a deep and growing hunger that was impossible to control. Myung-ho, at that moment, mentioned that Ai Huan had cured someone infected, perhaps by accident, and that he wouldn't allow him to destroy that distorted paradise he was planning to create. However, while he was speaking, Myung-ho noticed, terrified, a large horde of zombies rapidly approaching him, making it impossible to defend himself with just a gun. Soon, the first zombie bit him, and he fell to the ground in the midst of the brutal attack. Desperate, Myung-ho began to scream for help and beg for mercy, but Ai Huan, who until then had only been watching, could no longer resist the overwhelming hunger and slowly advanced to devour him along with the horde. Choi was watching the whole scene in horror from the hotel window, clearly witnessing the moment when Myung-ho was brutally devoured by the horde of zombies, including Ai Huan himself, who could no longer resist the uncontrollable hunger that was taking hold of him at that moment. And it was in this terrible way that Myung-ho died. Sujin stood still for a long time, staring silently out the window. She was still trying to process what she had just seen. She was in shock, her gaze lost. When the doctor approached and asked what was going on, Sujin replied that everything was fine. She said it was nothing and quickly closed the window, avoiding letting others see that scene too. She commented that maybe it would be better to look for the others, since they were probably worried. The doctor agreed, thinking it made sense. After some time, the rain finally stopped and the sun appeared, lighting up the landscape. The horde of zombies that had previously threatened the area began to quietly move away. Kim, watching that clear sky, felt a certain sense of relief. To him, that sunlight marked the end of another difficult phase. At the hospital, Kadu expressed his hope that everyone was okay. But suddenly, Taehoon stood up firmly and grabbed his weapon. He said he couldn't just sit there doing nothing. He felt guilty about how everything had ended and wanted to take responsibility. Lifting the heavy metal doors, he prepared to leave, but Kadu questioned him. He wanted to know if Taehoon really thought he could get out of there alone. He explained that the car key had been taken and that the weapon was defective. Given that, trying to leave would basically be suicide. Taehoon replied that just staying there, waiting for the zombies to break in, was also a way of dying. He said that if he could at least get out, maybe he could save someone. That was when Kim appeared, interrupting the conversation. He said they didn't need to worry about that. Kidu and Taehoon were startled by his sudden presence, nearly having a heart attack from the scare. Kim explained that the car was already outside, waiting for them. Both asked if he was okay, and Kim confirmed he was. He apologized for the delay. Kadu, still confused, asked what had happened. He remembered that Kim had been shot. Kim replied that apparently, yes, but the shot hadn't hit any vital spot. He said he had lost consciousness for a while, but now everything was fine. Tan then asked how the people at the hotel were. Kim replied that first they should go back, and then he would explain everything. Later, with everyone reunited again, the group prepared simple gravestones to honor those who had passed. The first was Kyung-soo, a school van driver. He loved the children more than anyone else at that hotel. The second was Seop, a delivery worker who dedicated his work exclusively to the elderly and sick. Both had been kind and beloved people. During the small ceremony, the doctor gave a brief speech. She said that even though they hadn't spent that much time together, they had faced that difficult moment side by side. She stated that they would never forget the love and effort those people had left in that place. That same night, at the hotel, the doctor gave some documents to Kim. They were important papers that could prove his blood had the ability to treat infected people. She explained that if one day he found a trustworthy medical institution, he could present those documents and explain his condition. But she asked him to be careful. That information couldn't become public. People with bad intentions could appear at any moment. After that, Taehoon asked if Kim really didn't remember anything. He wanted to know if he remembered walking alone from the hospital to the hotel. Kim replied that yes, he was sure he had walked the whole way on his own, but he admitted that his memories got blurry as he approached the hotel. Everything seemed like a distant dream, as if it weren't real. Taehoon turned to the doctor and asked if that had anything to do with his condition. The doctor replied that it was impossible to be sure. Maybe it was just temporary amnesia caused by the impact of the shot he had taken. Kim then explained that, in the end, Myung had been attacked by the infected and died there, disappearing without a trace. Sujin, who had been listening silently, felt uneasy because she knew the truth about what had really happened, but chose not to say anything. The doctor, on her part, said there was still something that didn't make sense to her. She couldn't understand why Myung had reacted that way. He seemed like a completely different person, as if hiding a horrible and violent nature that only now had surfaced. Kadu replied that there are many people like that. He said he had seen that type more than once. People without compassion, consumed by greed and dark thoughts. He said those people are often more dangerous than the infected themselves, precisely because, like them, they are still survivors. Then Taehoon asked if Kim still wanted to go to Yangyang. He said that basically, the road there was destroyed. No matter which state road they tried to take, they would always end up on a dangerous route. If they encountered people who looked like soldiers, the best thing to do would be to avoid them. Kadu was puzzled. He wanted to know why they should avoid soldiers. Wasn't it the military's job to offer protection? Taehoon explained that they weren't official units, but small groups. Men who only wore uniforms. He said that just because someone is dressed like a soldier doesn't mean they're trustworthy. He then revealed that in his old group, 3 members had become deserters and abandoned the army. Kadu asked how many deserters there had been exactly. Taehoon replied that it was all the survivors from his platoon, except him. During a specific incident, they had fled and taken a different path than his. He said it was hard to explain the details of what happened, but there was one thing he could say for sure. If they crossed paths with those men, they should consider them a real threat. Kim asked if Taehoon really thought it would be easy to find those men again. He reminded him that everything that had happened to Taehoon had taken place a few weeks ago. Taehoon confirmed it and said that, to be honest, he hoped never to see them again. Even so, he couldn't stop worrying, especially knowing they were heading exactly in the direction those men had gone toward Yangyang. The memory of that night came back with force. It was the moment when Taehoon's entire platoon was either killed or infected. He had fled in desperation, running for his life, trying to keep his mind focused in order to escape that hell. The tactical command center wasn't far, and he needed to deliver a report. But when he arrived, he witnessed an unexpected scene. The soldiers from the 3rd platoon were detaining a civilian. They were supposed to be his allies. One of the soldiers asked if the 2nd platoon's leader had survived, and there he was, Taehoon, standing before the 3rd platoon. Confused, he asked what they were doing. The leader of that group then pointed a gun at his head, saying he was making too much noise and asked if he still thought he was in command of anything. Taehoon tried to understand if Minjun had lost his mind. He wanted to know if everyone there had gone insane, to the point of aiming a gun at a civilian. But another soldier snapped back, saying saying Taehoon had no right to judge them. He reminded him that Taehoon had killed his own men to survive. To him, that was pure hypocrisy. Minjun tried to calm things down, stating they weren't killing anyone, just trying to steal a car to escape. He said they hadn't murdered anyone, they just wanted to survive. But at that moment, the horde of zombies began to approach. Panic spread among the 3rd platoon soldiers. Taehoon, watching the chaos, realized that was the last unit of the tactical command. All the battalions from headquarters were already dead. Minjun then struck Taehoon on the head, knocking him to the ground. He said they were wasting time and ordered the others to get in the car. One of the rookies was still pointing a gun at the civilian, trembling all over. A more experienced soldier, annoyed by the hesitation, said it was simple to understand. Without hesitation, he shot the civilian in the head and told the rookie to get in the car immediately. Minjun asked if they were satisfied now and ordered them to get in the car quickly. One of the soldiers hesitated and asked if they were really going to leave Taehoon behind. Minjun coldly replied yes. He said he was leaving him alive on purpose, so he would become fresh food for the zombies. Then they all drove off, abandoning him in front of the approaching horde. Once again, Taehoon was forced to fight against his former comrades to survive. He said he couldn't say for sure that they were in Yangyang, but he was convinced they had gone in that direction. And as everyone knew, most of the roads to Yangyang were blocked. Because of that, they probably hadn't gone far, especially using a vehicle. Even so, there was a good chance they were in Yangyang. Kim thanked him for the warning but said they couldn't waste any more time. Despite the dangers, he wanted to find his family before it was too late. Later, Taehoon was back at the same spot where he used to stand guard. The doctor approached and said he needed to rest, but he replied that he hadn't been able to sleep properly. He wanted to know how the others were. She explained that the children were a bit anxious, but slowly things were calming down. Even so, she advised Taehoon not to carry so much guilt. She said the hidden actions of others weren't anyone's responsibility. The best thing he could do was turn those painful memories into strength, to remember those who fought until the end. Taehoon nodded slightly, acknowledging that she was right. Meanwhile, Kim watched the two from afar. His mind was still full of doubts about what had happened to him. That bizarre transformation still haunted him. He wondered how long he could keep that dark side of himself hidden. Later, everyone began to prepare to leave. They carefully gathered the supplies. Taehoon asked if Kim was sure he would be okay alone, and suggested he at least take a firearm. But Kim refused. He said he didn't need it. After all, they weren't going to battle, and it was better for the weapons to stay with those who remained behind, to protect the people staying there. Taehoon handed over a map with the best route to Yangyang. He also said that the 3 of them had helped him a lot all that time, and that he felt a bit bad for not being able to repay them in kind. Even so, he sincerely wished that Kim would find his family, and that everything would turn out well for all the survivors. The doctor also said goodbye to Sujin, asking them to be very careful along the way. At the window, the little girl they had helped waved enthusiastically, saying goodbye. Kim, seeing that, couldn't help but remember his niece. Before leaving, he thanked everyone for the hospitality and support during that difficult time. Soon after, they departed. The doctor, standing beside Taehoon, asked if he really thought they would be okay, and suggested that maybe he should have gone with the group to try to reconnect with his old unit. But Taehoon firmly replied that he wasn't going anywhere. He said he would stay there with her because that place was now his home. Along the way, the group found some abandoned houses. They served as shelter where they could eat and rest before continuing their journey the next day. Eventually, they arrived at the Yangyang tunnel. Kadu commented that thanks to Taehoon's map, they got there much faster than expected. Even after following the map successfully to the Yangyang tunnel, Kim still had doubts about whether it would be safe to go through. Sujin pointed out that, in fact, there was no other way. Kadu agreed and told Kim that they probably had no choice but to go through the tunnel. Faced with this, Kim volunteered to go ahead and check what was inside. As the group advanced, hidden people watched them from a distance. Already inside the tunnel, Kim began to feel hopeful. He believed he was getting closer and closer to the city where his sister lived. However, that hope was interrupted when they found several buses completely blocking the passage. These buses were being used as a barricade by none other than the soldiers of the 3rd platoon, now led by Minjun. He observed coldly and commented that finally, a real prey had appeared. Until that moment, according to him, they had only come across pathetic targets, but now it was worth acting. Kim immediately suspected that this man might be one of the deserters Taehoon had mentioned. Sujin, frightened, also wanted to know who that man was and why they were blocking the tunnel. Kadu asked them to stay calm and suggested waiting a bit to better understand the situation. Kim cautiously asked if the barricade had been set up on purpose and if the man intended to remove it. Minjun, who was part of the deserters group, responded with disdain, saying Kim could try to get through alone if he wanted. But before anyone could move, an out-of-control truck entered the tunnel from the opposite side. Surrounding the group, and cutting off any escape route. They were completely cornered. Minjun then reinforced that they had already been captured. Armed soldiers started aiming at them from inside the buses. He said there was no more need to stall. In no time, the three Kim, Kadu, and Sujin were tied up and thrown into a storage building being used as a holding cell. Inside the warehouse, Kadu tried to warn about a woman in the enemy group, but one of the soldiers mocked him, asking if he still thought he had the right to give orders. With a disgusting tone, the soldier looked at Sujin and commented that she had a pretty face, so he wouldn't hurt her too much. After that, the three were locked up while the soldiers discussed what to do next. Irritated, Kadu commented that those young men only knew how to act through threats. Without a gun pointed at their heads, they seemed clueless. He said sooner or later they would learn a lesson. Sujin, worried, asked if they could be the deserters Taehun had mentioned. Kadu thought that made sense. There were 4 men, and the insignia on their uniforms indicated they were from a real army division. Kim said that, based on their conversations, they probably planned to leave them there overnight. It was important to think of a way to escape, but there was a big problem. They had stolen the car, the motorcycle, and likely the supplies too. Escaping on foot without food or transportation seemed impossible. Sujin raised another even more dangerous possibility. She said they might know who Kim was, especially if they had a radio and were listening to the broadcasts. Kadu became alarmed. If they discovered that zombies didn't bite Kim, that could become a huge problem. Suddenly, a voice came from the back of the warehouse. A man, who had been hidden until then, wanted to know what they meant by zombies not biting Kim. Kim became nervous, realizing he had said too much. He asked who that man was. The man introduced himself as Yang. He said he had been captured the same way 5 days earlier. Surprised, Sujin asked if he had really been held there for 5 days. Yang confirmed, saying more or less, but at least they kept him alive because he was useful. He was a doctor, and the soldiers figured they might need him. From time to time, they dragged him out to provide care, then tied him up again in that place. Kadu, outraged, said it was inhumane. They were being treated worse than prisoners of war. Yang, however, was more concerned with the earlier revelation. He wanted to know more about Kim's possible immunity. Kadu tried to deflect, saying it wasn't quite like that. Yang then promised to keep it a secret. He said he just wanted to confirm a hypothesis. He wanted to know if someone truly existed who was completely immune to zombie bites. And if that were the case, who had made Kim that way? It was possible their own organization had been involved in it from the start. Meanwhile, outside, the deserters were enjoying the supplies brought by Kim and his group. The food, which would have lasted at least a week, was now being consumed by them. Minjun, noticing a visibly uneasy recruit, asked if he was feeling guilty. He said there was no need to feel that way and suggested they enjoy the prisoner. He said it was a good opportunity and mocked the recruit's soft heart, asking how long he thought he would survive acting like that. Another soldier encouraged the rookie, saying he should take the chance. Then Minjun spoke about Kim and the other 2 who came with Sujin, saying they seemed different too. He said that the next day, they would feed that thing with the fresh meat they had just caught. Back in the holding cell, Sujin, still trying to understand what Yang was saying, asked if he was claiming to be the one responsible for making Kim immune. She wanted to know if he had also been involved in the creation of the zombie virus. Startled, Yang quickly denied it. He said no, absolutely not. He admitted he had participated in the project in the beginning, but had completely cut ties when he realized how insane his research partner had become. Kadu wanted to understand better, and asked what project Young-hoon was talking about. Upon hearing the question, Young-hoon recalled the past, and explained that the experiment had been born from pure madness. The man responsible was Dr. Shin, a brilliant, talented, and respected pathologist. Young-hoon deeply admired him and initially felt honored to be part of the project. But the truth behind it was horrifying and extremely dangerous. The real goal of the experiment was to create a new form of humanity. Human beings free from disease, with bodies strengthened to their absolute limit. Shin wanted to elevate humans to a level close to that of gods. Kadu, hearing all that, asked if it wasn't some kind of disguised cult. Young-hoon replied that no, it was a scientific project, but he understood the confusion, because it really did sound fanatical. Many had abandoned the project precisely because of that. Furthermore, the experiments were absurdly risky. The virus was injected into terminal patients to monitor whether they could come back to life. The ethical violations alone would have been enough to put Dr. Shin in prison for decades. And worse, if the virus ever escaped the lab, the consequences could be catastrophic. Young-hoon then suggested that maybe Kim was exactly the result of that project. A new human, a perfect specimen who couldn't be bitten by zombies. Meanwhile, outside, Minjun was rummaging through the supplies they had stolen from Kim's group. While checking the materials, he found a sample of Kim's blood. Noticing it, he began to grow suspicious. Later, inside the warehouse, the group discussed the possible origin of the apocalypse. They asked if all of this had happened because the virus had leaked. Young-hoon said he couldn't say for sure, but admitted it was the most plausible explanation. Everything that had occurred matched the risks of that project. Uneasy, Sujin asked what exactly Kim had to do with all of it. That was when Young-hoon asked if, by any chance, Kim had ever been to a hospital called Zhou, located in Inyan. Kim paused for a moment and remembered yes, that was where he had worked on a project years ago. Young-hoon explained that, although it looked like an ordinary hospital, that place was actually a secret research lab in disguise. If Kim had contact with that hospital, it was very likely he had been infected there. Kim, outraged, asked if that was what he wanted from the beginning. He wanted to know if Young-hoon intended to return to that lab, and what exactly he was trying to confirm. He said he knew the price that experiment had cost humanity. In his speech, Kim mentioned everything that had been destroyed because of the virus: entire families, lost lives, monsters created, and a world turned into hell. Filled with anger and strength, he managed to break free from the handcuffs. Kadu watched carefully, realizing that now Young-hoon, one of those involved in the disaster, was there trying to cooperate. Young-hoon admitted that Kim was right. He said that no matter how many apologies he gave, he could never make up for the tragedy he had helped cause. But he said there was a reason he was there. He wanted to confirm whether Kim was truly immune, because that could be important for everyone. He believed Kim's immunity wasn't luck. There was something special. Maybe Kim was the key, the hope of the world. Kadu, skeptical, asked if they wanted to turn Kim into a test subject too. Young-hoon replied that wasn't the case. He said that if they had access to Kim's antibodies, they could try to develop a cure, and if he was seen as the bearer of the solution, he could become humanity's hero. But Kim didn't seem convinced. He asked what would happen if the plan failed. What if instead of helping, the antibodies only made things worse? Before they could continue the discussion, the warehouse door opened, and the young rookie soldier entered. He saw that Kim had freed himself from the handcuffs and got nervous, saying that if any superiors had walked in, they would all be in trouble. But he assured them he wasn't there to hurt anyone. He said the commander had ordered him to do it, but he didn't want to follow those orders. In fact, he wanted help. Kadu, suspicious, asked how someone who had dragged them there now wanted help. The rookie said he had no choice. If he disobeyed, he didn't know what could happen to him. He confessed that, in practice, he was also a prisoner there. Young-hoon stepped in and said that guard really was different from the others. He said the rookie had never acted violently, and in fact, seemed like he just wanted to escape. Kadu still seemed resistant. He said you couldn't trust someone who had locked them up so easily. In times like this, anyone could betray you from behind. Even so, the rookie insisted. He said that if they didn't escape that night, they would all die. He revealed that the next morning, 2 of them would be executed. Kidu, shocked, asked if they were really being treated as prisoners of war, and Young-hoon, without hesitation, confirmed it. The rookie said that at dawn, he and another person would be thrown to the infected creature held in that building. That creature, in fact, was Dr. Young-hoon's wife, kept alive even after infection. Upon hearing that, the rookie remembered the last execution he had witnessed. The victim, after being brutally beaten, was dragged to the place and left there as food for the creature. Min-jun, without remorse, commented that they were only doing that because they were bored. He said that, isolated in the middle of the mountains with nothing to do, they sought some kind of entertainment. He spoke directly to the rookie, saying there was no point in resisting. Unlike the doctor, he didn't seem to be of any use, and if there was anyone to blame, it was himself. The rookie then turned to Min-jun and asked if that wasn't too much. He said taking things from others to survive was one thing, but killing someone just for fun was something completely different. He asked if that was really necessary, saying that if they continued like this, they would end up becoming worse than the zombies themselves. Min-jun mocked the rookie's compassion. He said that, as a veteran, he had to teach him a lesson. He said that to survive in a world taken by monsters, you had to become even more monstrous than they were. If someone became worse than a zombie, they would stop fearing them. Without hesitation, Min-jun ordered the rookie to be thrown to the infected, and so it was done. He was devoured in front of everyone. Kim watched everything and asked if they did this kind of thing just for fun, using prisoners as food for the infected. Kadu replied that it was even sicker than he imagined. The rookie himself confirmed that everyone there seemed insane, and that those executions happened every day. He said he didn't want to be part of that anymore. Sujin asked if that was really true. Dr. Young-hoon confirmed it. He revealed that they kept his infected wife alive, feeding her prisoners as part of a macabre game. Kim then asked the rookie directly what exactly he wanted. The young man explained that the area was completely surrounded by mountains, making it impossible to escape on foot. To flee, they would need a vehicle. He added that he knew the superiors didn't take much care of their belongings, so it would be possible to steal one. The rookie had a plan. He said that the next morning, during the moment they were being taken to execution, they could overpower the superiors, grab the vehicle keys, and escape. Sujin argued that it was far too dangerous. She asked if he really thought he could defeat armed soldiers so easily. The rookie replied that he didn't need to defeat them all, just one, the leader, Min-jun. If he fell, the others would submit. Kim then asked why he was willing to go so far. Those were his superiors. From what he said, he could escape alone. Why take such a risk? The rookie replied simply. He said he was doing it because it was the right thing to do. Sujin acknowledged the value of the gesture but insisted it was still too dangerous. While they talked, Min-jun opened the warehouse doors. He asked if the torture hadn't started yet and called the 3 newcomers, saying there was a place they were going to. He ordered the group to follow him. Minjun looked at Kim and asked if he had already managed to break free from the handcuffs. He said that was convenient. He told the rookie to remove the others' handcuffs as well, as it would make it easier for them to move. Then, they were taken to a lodging area with beds. Minjun explained that it was nothing special, just a place to rest. If they needed anything, they could just ask. Sujin found it strange. First, they were locked in the warehouse, and now they were being treated kindly? Minjun said it wasn't that bad. In a world like that, it was natural to be suspicious of strangers. He asked if he needed to prove it. He told the rookie he could leave now. Everything was fine. When the rookie closed the door, leaving only the 4 of them inside, Minjun sighed and said, "Rookies always needed things," explained multiple times before understanding. Then, he suggested they get to the main point. Now that they were alone and no one else could hear, he wanted to know their real intentions. Minjun praised their perception and decided to be direct. He asked if they had noticed that the zombies didn't bite one of them. Meanwhile, at the hotel, the doctor was examining a woman who had been cured after biting Kim. His blood had somehow cured the virus. The woman said she felt bad for not having the chance to repay him. Since Kim had already left, she hoped he was doing well. Later, the doctor left the office with her daughter and was approached by Taehun, who wanted to talk. She looked worried and asked if Taehun thought Kim was safe in Yang Yang. She also questioned whether she had made a mistake by sending the letter confirming that Kim's blood could cure zombies. Maybe that had put all 3 of them in danger. Taehun tried to reassure her. He said Kim was strong and knew how to take care of himself. She had done the right thing as a doctor. He was sure that the letter could be useful to him. The doctor replied that she hoped so. Back at the military base, Minjun was rummaging through supplies when he found blood samples and some documents. He discovered something surprising. One of the 3 wasn't bitten by zombies. More than that, that person's blood had the ability to turn zombies back into humans. That blood was the key to saving humanity, a true savior, and he couldn't allow someone like that to stay locked up in a warehouse. Kidu asked if that was the reason they were suddenly being treated well. Sujin, still suspicious, asked what exactly he wanted from them. Minjun replied with a smile. He said that from that moment on, he would take very good care of Earth's savior. It was obvious that Minjun wanted to share the benefits. If a savior of the world really emerged, they would be treated like a god. Minjun just wanted to enjoy some of that glory, and asked if everyone understood. Kidu, deep down, knew that talk about taking care of them was just a front. He just wanted to make sure he wouldn't be eliminated in the process. Kim asked why Minjun hadn't told the rookie about any of this. Minjun responded as if it were obvious. He said the fewer people who knew, the better. That way, the reward wouldn't have to be shared and there would be fewer mouths to feed. He assured them that the other soldiers weren't a problem because they were all under his command. Kim then confronted him. He said that was how he dealt with everything, wasn't it? He was treating the 3 of them well only because he didn't yet know which one of them had the immunity. The moment he found out who the real immune one was, he would kill the other 2. He also said that Minjun killed people like it was fun. He asked if Minjun really thought they would become his allies. He should go look for someone else. Even so, Minjun said there was no rush. They could think about the proposal. They'd have time together and could talk more the next day. When he closed the door, Kim was visibly irritated. He thought there wasn't much time. He needed to find his family as soon as possible and would do everything he could to escape. Later, Kadu asked what exactly they would do now. He said Minjun was trying to use them for his own benefit. That was even worse than being treated like prisoners. Sujin commented that all of this seemed to have started because of the letter the doctor had left. Kim concluded that now they had no choice but to trust the rookie. If he really wanted to help, he would make a move soon. Kadu still didn't fully trust him, but Kim said they didn't have many options. That's when someone knocked on the door asking if they were okay. It was him, the rookie, Hang Yul. He said it was his patrol shift, so he was alone. Kim replied that they were listening. Kadu, suspicious, asked if he was just pretending and had come back to keep an eye on them. Hang Yul explained that he wanted to come in and talk properly, but the veterans had locked the door. He apologized for everything having reached that point. He said he never wanted to deceive them like that. Kim replied that they were fine, but asked if Young-hoon had heard anything. Young-hoon said the squad wanted to leave the next morning. They were packing everything and planned to go to Seoul. He didn't know the exact reason, but everything indicated they were suddenly moving. Sujin, speaking softly, asked if it had to do with Kim. Kadu replied that they were probably planning to sell him to the government or the military. Young-hoon mentioned the name Jo Min-jun. He said he was terrifying. He manipulated anyone in his way, and when those people were no longer useful, he simply got rid of them. He didn't know exactly what had been discussed between him and the veteran, but made it clear they shouldn't fool themselves into thinking that man would do anything good. Kim agreed. He said they wouldn't believe that. He stated that Minjun wanted something only they had. The power now was in their hands, and the next morning, they used that power to impose conditions. Kim declared that if they didn't accept, there would be no cooperation. Minjun mocked him, saying that's why you shouldn't feed a fish that's already been caught. He said he had shown a bit of kindness, and now Kim thought he was in charge. He asked if Kim had forgotten where he was. Azokum replied that it was Minjun who should remember that. Min-jun, though displeased, acknowledged that the blood worked. That letter meant nothing without knowing how to use the power or without taking proper precautions. He admitted that, actually, he was the one in a weaker position. Kidu wondered if what they were doing was right. He knew Kim was bluffing, but if Min-jun believed it, that's what mattered. Even so, he wasn't sure Min-jun would fall for it so easily. Min-jun then said that, now that everything had been said, it made sense. He admitted they could have problems if they were careless. He said he would accept hearing their conditions. Kim then made it clear. The first condition was that, no matter what happened, Min-jun had to guarantee the safety of all three of them. The second condition was that, if there was any need for contact with the government or military, the decision would be made by them, not Min-jun. Min-jun asked if the destination wasn't obvious. The route was headed to Seoul. Kim replied that he was bringing it up precisely because they didn't know what was there. It could be nothing but destruction and zombies. It was impossible to trust an uncertain destination. Kim concluded by saying that, unlike Min-jun and the rest of the group who lived in the mountains, they had real reasons not to let that power slip from their hands. They had information about what was happening in the real world, and that made all the difference. Min-jun admitted that it made sense. He doubted the three would be willing to lead him into a zombie nest, especially since they didn't want to die either. Kim then presented the third condition. He wanted to use one of the blood samples to try to cure the infected woman Min-jun had kept locked up. Min-jun asked why he cared so much about that particular zombie. Kim said that was none of his business. He also said the conditions weren't absurd, and that the experiment could even serve as a test to prove the blood could cure the infected. Min-jun accepted, saying it made sense and that they would proceed as agreed. Kim thought that, fortunately, the plan had worked. Still, he didn't expect Min-jun to keep his promises, but at least now they had a chance. There was no choice but to trust Yahello. Later, they visited the infected woman, Dr. Young-hoon's wife. Kim approached with the blood sample in hand, while one of the soldiers asked Min-jun if he was really going to allow that. Min-jun simply told him to stay quiet and watch. He said things were about to get interesting, but before Kim could get closer, Min-jun stopped him. He said there was no need to rush, especially since not everyone in the audience had arrived yet. Then they threw Dr. Young-hoon into the room to witness the scene, since that was his wife. Min-jun said he should be thankful for the privilege. Kim looked discreetly at Young-hoon, who gave him a sign. It was time to put the plan into action. One of the soldiers was terrified, watching Kim deliberately approach a zombie. Yahello also doubted whether it would actually work. Kim kept walking. The infected woman didn't bite him, that was his power, he was immune. Everyone was shocked to see him approach gently and, with care, offer his blood to her. Moments later, she collapsed. Dr. Young-hoon rushed to her, desperate, trying to check her condition. After a few moments, she started to speak again. Young-hoon asked for water urgently, as she was showing clear signs of dehydration. One of the soldiers, in shock, asked if the zombie had really turned back into a human. Min-jun, seeing the two helping the woman, asked what they were doing and ordered them to get the water the doctor had requested. But the soldier pushed back, asking why he hadn't sent the rookie. Kim then realized what Min-jun was about to do. Without hesitation, Min-jun gunned down the two soldiers on the spot. Min-jun turned to Yahello and asked if he wasn't surprised. He said that from now on, he would keep an eye only on him, and that it would even be easier as long as he followed orders. Kudu, watching from afar, concluded that the man was completely insane. He shot his own allies without remorse. Kim asked why he had done it. They were his subordinates, his mission companions. Min-jun replied as if it were obvious. He said he was just reducing the number of mouths to feed. He remarked that with the cure in hand, they had a long journey ahead, and the fewer people, the better. He said he would keep his promise and protect the three. But at that moment, Dr. Young-hoon stood up, pointed a gun directly at Min-jun's head, and ordered him not to move. He said he would rather be bitten by a zombie than follow any of his orders. Min-jun, with a sarcastic smile, said the rookie had finally grown a spine. He asked if he really dared to point a gun at a superior. He said it was obvious he was too scared to shoot, but to keep his promise of going on a long trip with the three, he'd have to trust them. He added that he couldn't be the only soldier there. He'd need someone to cover his back. Young-hoon asked if he really expected him to trust him, and Yahello said no. He said he needed someone at his side, but he would never fall for that again. He declared that he was only still alive because he was useful to Min-jun, and told him not to make him laugh. He called him greedy, someone who used and killed others without thinking, a miserable psychopath. Min-jun simply replied that it seemed he had lost all hope again. He said he should have killed him with the others, should have sent him to meet his parents in heaven. But Yahello reacted quickly. He struck Min-jun on the head with the butt of the gun, knocking him to the ground, and began kicking him in rage. Kim then stepped in. He thanked him for the help, but said that was enough. They didn't need to become monsters like him. Kim said their priority now was taking care of Dr. Young-hoon's wife. As for Min-jun, he was restrained and locked up, though he was still moving, even injured. Later, Kim carefully organized everything: supplies, firearms, and vehicles, while the doctor's wife was already showing signs of stability. Kidu commented that, suddenly, they had gained more allies, and the best part was that they got another vehicle. With the supplies gathered, they could leave that place quickly. Kim, even a bit worn out, admitted it was good to hear that. Sujin tried to comfort him. She told him not to blame himself so much. She said it wasn't his fault that the soldiers had died, and in the end, they were enemies too. She asked Kim not to carry that burden alone. Kidu thought that it was always like this. Every time, Kim felt responsible for everything. In a zombie apocalypse, that kind of feeling could be dangerous. He reflected that another kind person had joined the group, kind even to a fault, considering the world they were living in. He told Young-hoon he understood how he felt, but that it wasn't the time for mourning. It was time to act. Hang-yeol agreed. He said he also wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Kidu then asked why he wouldn't come with them, since he didn't have a set destination either. Together, they would be stronger. Hang-yeol was deeply grateful for that, and visibly moved by the invitation. But before he could say anything more, he was shot in the back. The shot came from Minjun. He mocked, saying he missed the head. What a shame. Maybe it was the fault of the gun he had never used before. Kim, surprised, wondered if Minjun had been hiding a weapon this whole time. Minjun confirmed it. He said he had planned to use it after everyone had left, but decided to act now. He declared he would take everything for himself, since it was so valuable to the group. Kidu asked if he had drunk the blood. Minjun smiled and said yes. He believed it would make him immune to zombies. Now he could enjoy his freedom. Unfortunately, he was starving and didn't plan to hold back. Kim then realized Minjun was also transforming. He told the others to run immediately, to go as far as they could, somewhere not even he could reach. He himself was about to lose control. Kidu was shocked. He asked if Kim really wanted to be left behind. Sujin feared Kim might repeat what he had done last time. Still, she told Kidu to obey. He protested, asking if she agreed with that. Auten intervened, saying their priority should be to save Young-hoon. But Minjun, staggering, asked who had given them permission to flee. Before he could shoot, Kim punched him with such force that he nearly broke his neck. He said that if Minjun was hungry, then so was he. At that moment, Dr. Young-hoon outside heard the shots and was terrified. The other three arrived soon after. The doctor asked if that had been the gunshot he heard and wanted to know what was happening. But Kidu said there was no time to explain. Young-hoon saw Minjun unconscious and urgently asked for a medical kit. Meanwhile, Kidu wondered what Kim was thinking, what he was planning at that moment. Then Minjun, wounded, stood up. He said it hadn't been that bad after all. Kim seemed weak, but he had landed a good punch. He commented that this was how it should be. The previous plan was just the easiest, fastest way. Now, they would fight to the death. Kim was the first to charge, but Minjun retaliated with force, throwing him far away. A fire began inside the warehouse, caused by the cigarette he had left near the fuel drums. As smoke spread, Minjun joked that maybe this counted as special effects for their final fight. He said it wasn't so bad. Minjun then reflected aloud. He said that if only the two of them couldn't be bitten by zombies, then they were of the same kind. Gods in the new world, humanity's saviors. But he soon declared that only one of them could exist. The next punch was brutal, so was Kim's. The fight between them intensified, violent, and merciless, while the fire consumed the warehouse. Sujin, outside, saw the flames and asked if the place was on fire. Young-hoon confirmed. He said the place was full of flammable chemicals. With that dense smoke, they had to get out quickly. But Kidu didn't want to stand by. He grabbed a rifle and said he would go rescue Kim. Sujin tried to stop him, saying it was too dangerous. Kidu, however, said he couldn't just abandon him. No matter how strong Kim was, he was still at risk. Sujin then revealed that Kim had told them to stay away, not just to escape, but to protect them from himself. He knew he was on the verge of losing control. Meanwhile, the two continued exchanging punches amidst the flames. Minjun looked at Kim and said he expected more. He asked if that was all he had. Kim thought he had landed the next hit, but quickly realized he hadn't. Minjun was just toying with him. Grabbing his head, he slammed it brutally against the concrete, and then kicked him away. With a twisted smile, he said this was insubordination, and, as a veteran, he had to teach a lesson. He remarked that the strange hunger he felt made it hard to control his strength. Even so, he said he wouldn't kill Kim. For some reason, he had no appetite for him. Kim, taking advantage of the distraction, landed a clean knee strike to Minjun's face. He fell but quickly got up, saying Kim didn't die so easily. And that was great. It made everything more fun. As they fought, Minjun's body kept growing, going through increasingly grotesque mutations. Even so, the fight raged on, violent and intense, amidst the flames consuming the warehouse. Outside, Sujin asked the doctor how Hang-yeol was doing. Young-hoon said he had already done all the emergency procedures he could. Fortunately, the bullet hadn't hit any vital organs, and even better, they had the necessary equipment for treatment. He commented, impressed, on the quality of the supplies they had. He asked if they had received professional help. Sujin confirmed. She said a doctor had helped them. Young-hoon nodded, acknowledging that thanks to that, the situation hadn't been worse. He just hoped Kim wouldn't need emergency treatment too. Meanwhile, Kidu paced nervously. He was extremely extremely worried, wondering if he could really leave Kim in there. If they lost Kim, it could mean the end of humanity. Determined, he started moving back toward the warehouse, now partially engulfed in flames. Then he heard something. He stopped and asked for silence. A faint sound came from inside, a cell phone ringing. Following the sound, he went up to the military base and found Kim's phone ringing. When he saw who was calling, he was completely shocked. Inside, with flames devouring everything, Minjun held Kim by the neck. His broken, bloodied body was barely responding. Minjun, with a bored expression, asked if that was all. He said he was disappointed. He admitted he was wrong. They weren't the same. Minjun believed he had evolved beyond Kim, and for that reason, decided to end it quickly and put an end to the torture. That was when Kadu appeared. He shouted for Kim to hear him that his sister had called. She was still alive. The words echoed like a jolt inside Kim, cutting through the pain, the blood, and the heat of the flames. It reignited something within him, a real reason to keep going. Hope, even if faint, made his heart race once more, and the fight was not over yet. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. Your support makes all the difference and motivates me to bring even more amazing stories. Let's do this together.